Chapter 609. In addition to sending a formal reply to Roland Wimbledon, he also wrote a personal letter to Edith. In the letter, he tactfully expressed his thoughts. The young king had not chosen a queen, and if he could further his relationship with Roland, he would feel more at ease. There was no real love in a political marriage, or rather, love was not the main character. There was no doubt about this for the Pearl of the Northern region. He believed that this was an excellent opportunity, especially since there would be no more power of enfeoffment in the future, which meant that the king would become the only noble in the whole of Grey Castle, and the queen's status would naturally be extraordinary. Carr believed that his daughter could read his mind. However, not only did His Majesty not reply, but Edith also did not reply. "Don't tell me it's because you don't like him." The Duke poured himself a third cup of black tea. "I've never seen you like anyone, and it doesn't matter at all. Since you used to consider Timothy, why don't you consider Roland now?" "That's not the same, father." "What's the difference? Aren't we both kings?" Edith closed the notebook and said, "Timothy needs a reliable ally in the northern region, or rather, a subordinate, and the way to ensure his loyalty is through marriage. If I don't agree, he'll kick the Kant family out of the way and support someone who is willing to obey him. In other words, if I don't become the queen, the status of our family will be in jeopardy, and we can't do anything about it. So at that time, I could only delay it. If Roland and his western region completely failed, then I would follow the rules of the game among the nobles and marry into the palace. But Roland doesn't need it." "What do you mean by doesn't need it?" "He chose me because of my ability, not because of the things behind me. Family, territory, and wealth are not important in his eyes." His daughter stroked the hanging ends of her hair. "Since the nobles and rules no longer exist, why should I restrict myself to those old rules? Do you know," she continued, "in the city hall of Neverwinter, there are only a few officials of noble origin. Most of them are ordinary civilians who have been selected through rounds of examinations. I have to admit that they are terrible in most aspects, but at least when it comes to doing their job, they are not much worse than ordinary nobles. This is His Majesty's new rule. As long as you can complete his work, you don't have to worry about losing your position. Therefore, you should also get rid of your old ways as soon as possible and adapt to the City Hall's new policy, so as not to drag me down. But even so, it's not bad for you to be queen." The Duke still did not want to give up. "You can still show your ability and give birth to a prince for him. In this way, the Kant family will become an inseparable ally of the royal family, and your brother will have a guarantee in the future." Edith showed a rare look of hesitation. "I'm afraid I can't do that." "But His Majesty, he seems to believe in love." The Duke frowned. "He already has someone in mind?" "Yes, a witch." "What?" He wondered if there was something wrong with his ears. "Scroll said that His Majesty will marry a witch," Edith said frankly. "And Scroll is also a witch. She works in City Hall as the Minister of Education." Political marriage? Carr could only think of this answer. But this is too ridiculous. Witches can't have children. It's not a political marriage, it's just because he likes the witch. She leaned back in her chair and played with the quill in her hand. "Yes, in this future marriage, love will be the main character. It sounds unbelievable, but I don't know why, after a month of contact with him, I kind of believe it." "Why?" "Feeling." His daughter curled up the corner of her mouth. "You'll understand when you meet him. He's the least noble I've ever seen." "What about the heir?" "As long as you want to solve it, there's always a way to solve it." Edith shook her head. "But that's not a problem we should care about, and we can't intervene in it." Iron Axe led a group of officers to patrol between the crisscrossing trenches. The trenches were mainly used to avoid the enemy's spear throwing or other long-range attacks. According to His Majesty's instructions, they were divided into several trenches, each spaced 20 to 30 meters apart. The horizontal trenches were connected by longitudinal trenches so that soldiers could pass through them. There were also wooden stakes and barbed wire on the ground to prevent the enemy from breaking through quickly. The machine gun forts were set up on both sides of the battlefield. In the front was a low bunker, and in the back was a towering tower, forming a high and low firepower net with intersecting shooting angles. Behind the trenches was the artillery position, where 50 12-pound field cannons stood side by side. Further back was the firing area reserved for the 152 mm long-song cannons. In order to ensure the progress of the project, Iron Axe specially applied for Maggie's express transportation from His Majesty to transport Lotus to Deep Valley Town in advance. Just by looking at the hidden danger of the position, the commander of the First Army felt that victory was already in his hands. They came to the end of the position and looked at the gray-brown mountains in the distance. This place was located at the foot of the impassable mountain range, which was the only way to go down the mountain. Less than a mile ahead was the steep impassable mountain range. Coldwind Ridge was located halfway up the mountain. Its strategic significance was similar to that of Border Town. It was mainly built to monitor Hermes. Once the beacon was lit in the city, many villages in the northern region and the nearest Deep Valley town would receive the warning. It would take a day and a half to reach the ambush site from Coldwind Ridge, so the First Army had plenty of time to prepare for the battle. "Can't we evacuate the townspeople from Coldwind Ridge in advance?" Brian, who had followed him to familiarize himself with the battlefield, could not help but ask. "Holy City may turn them into the first batch of berserkers to attack the front. That will alert the enemy. We can't take this risk before the position is fully set up," Iron Axe replied expressionlessly. "Coldwind Ridge is too close to Holy City, so it can only be used as a bait, not the main battlefield. And no one will listen to us," Vanner added. "Think about it, if someone runs into the town and tells the local people that the war is about to begin, and you should run away from here and go to the foot of the mountain, who will believe it? Unless we force them to leave by force. If we do that, Holy City will immediately see our plan." Brian sighed. "I understand that, but don't worry. The encirclement will be completed in 3 days," Iron Axe said in a low voice. "By then, we can inform the people of Coldwind Ridge to evacuate. According to the intelligence sent back by the spies, most of Holy City's troops are still stationed in the camp. We should have enough time to evacuate the town." "I hope so." Brian suddenly widened his eyes. "Wait, what's that?" Iron Axe followed his line of sight and looked at the distant mountains. His heart sank slightly. Chapter 610. Soli Dal crossed the broken castle gate with satisfaction and walked into the castle of Coldwind Town. Take down Coldwind Ridge in 3 days? Apart from the 2 days spent on the road, it only took him a quarter of an hour to break through the town's wall. Of course, it was still a question whether the mud fence, which was only as tall as a man, was counted as a city wall. There were only a few guards on guard duty. After 2 of them were killed by the Judgment Army, they immediately dispersed. There was almost no formal resistance. Is this the town that guards the border? The Kingdom of Grey Castle is just Essosa. The only thing that dissatisfied him was that when the army of the church was still halfway up the mountain, the beacon under their feet started to smoke, as if they knew that they were coming to attack the town. Although it was only a matter of time before the other territories in the northern region saw the alarm, this lack of respect still made him a little angry. They regarded the troops of the Holy City as enemies in advance, which meant that they had been desecrating the town for a long time. He had already sent a small team of Judgment Army to the beacon, ready to capture these people and interrogate them before sending them to the gallows. "This way, my lord," the knight leading the way said in a trembling voice. When the sword was placed on the necks of these people, the knights did not show the righteousness of sacrificing themselves to protect their lord. Instead, they immediately knelt down and surrendered, declaring that they were willing to serve the church. This was the ugliness, cowardice, and helplessness of people without faith. They were not worth mentioning compared to the Judgment Warriors who fought for God. After killing several guards along the way, the Judgment Army broke into the Lord's study and blocked all possible windows, although Soli felt that they did not have the courage to jump out of the window. He slowly stepped into the room and watched the pale Lord of Coldwind Ridge slump into the chair. "Good afternoon, Lord Kevin Martin. You dare to break into Coldwind Ridge. Does the Holy City want to openly make an enemy of Grey Castle?" He's finished, Soli thought. Fear had completely robbed him of his will. After fighting against demonic beasts in the Hermes defense line for decades, the archbishop had honed a unique ability, which was to taste fear. Some people could turn fear into the desire to survive, while others could only be swallowed by fear. The former was a necessary quality for judgment warriors to be promoted to God's punishment army, while the latter would be eliminated by endless bloody campaigns. Kevin was obviously the latter. That's right. Didn't you already know that? What? I don't understand what you mean. It's too late to regret now, sir, Soli interrupted. Buying food at a high price and forbidding merchants from going to the holy city. Don't tell me you did it on a whim. The king of Grey Castle wants to turn Coldwind Ridge into an outpost to attack the holy city. Of course, he can't blame us for launching an early counterattack. You are making groundless accusations. Kevin shook his head. I didn't do any of these things. The king has never sent an envoy to Coldwind Ridge, not to mention attacking Hermes. It's fine if you don't want to admit it. His Holiness will have his ways to search your brain for the information he wants. However, it won't do you any good if that happens. So, it's better for you to confess everything you know now. I really didn't do this. You can't wrong me. His fat body shrank back. I'm the Lord of Coldwind Ridge, an Earl of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Your behavior has violated the Months of Demons Convention. Enough. You asked for it. Soli Dal waved his hand in annoyance. The Judgment Warriors immediately dragged him out of the study. After the Archbishop sat down on the Lord's seat, he vaguely felt that something was wrong. The Lord had obviously been overwhelmed by fear. Why did he still refuse to give in? Was he so loyal to Roland Wimbledon that he would rather be taken to the Holy City for interrogation than to reveal the king's plan? At this moment, a chief judge walked into the room and said, Your Excellency, Pisos has sealed the granary, but what? There's not much food stored in there. It's estimated that it's only enough for the townspeople to eat for 1 or 2 months. It's impossible to support an army. Are you sure? Soli frowned. Pisos searched the granary and even asked the guards. They said that there hasn't been a large shipment of grain recently. The wheat in the warehouse is the same as last year's stock, the chief judge reported in detail. Then what's with the news that the town is buying grain at a high price? He thought for a moment and said, Go and ask those merchants. The chief judge nodded. In addition, we've searched all the garrison camps in the west of the city. Most of them are empty. According to the surrendered knight, there hasn't been any effective replenishment since the border army was wiped out in Hermes. In other words, Coldwind Ridge wasn't ready for war at all? This was too different from the information provided by Zero. The archbishop's frown deepened. After a long silence, he ordered, There must be believers of the church in this town. Gather them and ask them in detail about the changes in Coldwind Ridge in the past 2 months. Also, interrogate those who voluntarily surrendered to the church and the local rats. I want to know what's going on immediately. The chief judge clenched his fist and said, I'll do it now. Soli leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. The attack on Grey Castle was a plan that had been decided long ago. The process and gains were not important, but he did not like this feeling of surprise at all. Where did I go wrong? The next day, the chief judge handed the collected information to the archbishop's desk. Soli turned to the first page and quickly scanned through the confessions. 2 local merchants bought grain on a large scale, and they hoarded thousands of kilograms of wheat? That's what the merchants said, the chief judge said in a low voice. After learning about this, I immediately searched their houses. There was indeed a lot of grain, but that's only for individuals. There were only 20 kilograms of grain in the basement, and there was no one in the house. Also, there is no one in the house. They must have escaped not long after the fire was lit. You mean, colluded? The archbishop quickly understood what the chief judge meant. Yes, Your Excellency. Only by colluding with foreign merchants and pretending to buy and sell grain from the left hand to the right hand, and then from the right hand to the left hand could they create such a false impression. Where did those merchants come from? From various towns in the northern region, Deep Valley Town, City of Evernight, Windswept Castle. They started buying grain at a high price a month ago. At first, not many people paid attention to it. It was not until the number increased that the merchants began to pay attention. We've locked up all the merchants in the town, but we haven't found those guys who transported the grain. If the two parties really colluded, then the chance of catching them was very small. But what was the other party's goal in doing this? To attract the attention of the Holy City so that His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff could launch an early invasion? Soli turned to the last few pages of the report in confusion and saw another piece of information. Chapter 611. A total of 3 people. All of them died in the shack under the platform. The presiding judge nodded. The watchmen of the beacon tower are rotated once a week, so when I arrived at the scene, the corpses were already smelly. Very good, so the beacon fire was not set by them but by someone else. Soli punched the desk and laughed angrily. Are they deliberately making fun of us? Or are they trying to find a reason for the Holy City to go to war? The specific reason is still unclear, but Your Excellency, one of the rats' testimony is very interesting. He pointed to the report and said, I wrote it down on the last page. The presiding judge flipped to the last page and skimmed through it. 2 weeks ago, someone set up checkpoints along the road under Coldwind Ridge, forbidding anyone from going to the impassable mountain range, but not stopping people from leaving? Exactly. He originally planned to go to Deep Valley Town to try his luck, but he saw a caravan that was supposed to go to Hermes was stopped. It seems that it really wasn't done by the Lord? Soli thought. Wait. 2 weeks ago? When was the last time those peddlers showed up? 3 days ago? The Archbishop's face instantly darkened. In other words, the checkpoint that forbids anyone from going to the impassable mountain range let those peddlers go? The answer was obvious. They're a group, the presiding judge replied. At least it looks like they're a group. How many people are there at the checkpoint? The rats only glanced at them from a distance. I estimate there are hundreds of them. As long as they show their tails. Solidal stood up. Pass down my order. Summon the Judgment Army. Your Excellency, do you want to go down the mountain? The presiding judge was stunned at first, and then he hurriedly dissuaded him. His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff ordered us to stay here after seizing Coldwind Ridge, ensure the mountain road is unblocked, and wait for the army to move out. If you want to catch a few people for questioning, just send a small team. Not only do I want to catch a few people, but I also want to crush their checkpoint. This is the price for making fun of the Holy City. Soli waved his hand impatiently. If we set off now, I'll see their heads hanging at the city gate the day after tomorrow. This has no impact on the Holy City's battle plan, and His Holiness won't blame us. But what if the enemy sets an ambush? Ambush? Soli glanced at him and said, I once led an army to attack the Broken Tooth Castle of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. It was an extremely tough battle. However, even if we relied on the mountains, the ambush of ordinary people could only bring some trouble to the God's Punishment Army, not to mention the open flat land at the foot of the mountain. Any action of ambushing the God's Punishment Army is tantamount to suicide. I hope they really have that kind of courage instead of fleeing at the sight of us. Speaking of this, the Archbishop paused. Now that you understand, go and execute my order. Yes, my lord. Soli sneered as he watched the chief judge leave. He would never let those blasphemers off. Coldwind Ridge sent a large group of people? Iron Axe asked as he looked at the fat pigeon that flew into the tent. Almost 1,000 people. Coo! Maggie flapped her wings. There are no food trucks or militia. They are all wearing armor, and some of them are carrying giant shields and short spears. Coo! Giant shield? Iron Axe was surprised. How big is it? Well. Maggie tilted her head and glanced at him. Almost as big as you, Coo. I see. Good job. As usual, the Sand Nation took out a piece of dried meat and handed it to the pigeon. Then he summoned the guards outside the tent and said, Inform Gun Battalion Commander Bryan and Artillery Battalion Commander Vanner to come to my tent for a meeting. The enemy is on the move. After listening to the information provided by the witches, Bryan could not help but frown. How could they come so fast? His Majesty needs 2 or 3 days to reach Deep Valley Town, and the Longsong cannons are not in place. The church reacted faster than we expected, but no matter whether His Majesty is here or not, we have to fulfill our duty and never retreat, Iron Axe said calmly. In any case, the enemy must not cross the defense line at the foot of the mountain. Yes, my lord. Both of them said in unison. Very good. Next is the specific combat arrangement. Iron Axe licked his lips. The enemy will need at least 1 day to reach the foot of the mountain, so we have plenty of time to prepare. There are only about 2,000 god stones of retaliation in total. Try to give them to the soldiers on the front line. The machine gunners are the focus of protection, so they must wear God's stones. He roughly explained the plan in his mind. In addition, I'll arrange 10 soldiers with good marksmanship and a machine gun squad to guard Miss Sylvie and focus on the most threatening enemies according to her on-site investigation instructions. The rest of the soldiers will follow the rules of the drill. I have a question, Vanner said hesitantly. Is it possible that the guy carrying the giant shield in the enemy team is? It's very likely to be the God's Punishment Army. Iron Axe nodded. According to Miss Maggie, ordinary people absolutely can't march with a shield of that size. Can bullets penetrate it? Brian asked. No one knows until they try, Iron Axe replied without hesitation. If the flintlock can't do any effective damage, your people will try to hinder the God's Punishment Army and let the artillery take care of them. In the end, we still have to rely on the artillery to solve the problem. Vanner smiled. Leave it to me, my lord. Early the next morning, Danny held his beloved rifle and went into the trench. According to yesterday's arrangement, he soon came to his prearranged position, a trench in the center of the position on the right flank. The shrubs and bushes had all been eradicated, so he could see the whole battlefield, which was very suitable for accurate shooting. He picked up a few stones from under his feet and piled them on the edge of the trench to make a small support. Then he put the rifle on the stone and aimed at the front. Through the crosshair, Danny could see the dew hanging on the grass on the ground, the spiders clinging to the barbed wire, the red dirt road covered with horse hoof prints, and the impassable mountain range in the distance. It was an excellent position to block. He pulled the bolt and pushed the first bullet into the chamber. Then he waited for the enemy to appear. As a hunter, Danny had always been patient. Since he was recruited into the militia by His Majesty, he had participated in a series of battles such as the defense of the Months of Demons, the defense of the Duke of Longsong, and the attack on King City. His weapon had also changed from the flintlock to the latest bolt rifle. In terms of combat experience, he was definitely one of the best in the First Army. If he had not insisted on staying in the front line, he would probably have become an officer in the gun battalion, second only to Sir Brian. But compared to commanding others, he preferred the feeling of shooting prey. From the day he touched the flintlock, he fell in love with it. It was easy to use and powerful. All it needed was a pair of good eyes and a little talent. Chapter 6:12. While Danny was waiting, another short man came running along the trench. Captain, you're so early. He took a few breaths, took off the bag that was slung across his body, and put it at Danny's feet. Here's all the ammunition I got. If I went hunting in the mountains, I should have come back by now, Danny said disapprovingly. How much did you give me? 30, that's not enough, he muttered. Damn machine gunner. The short man, named Malt, was the youngest soldier in the team. He was only 16 years old, and he was Danny's protector. Every precision shooter was accompanied by a protector, who could quickly suppress the enemy when they approached, so as to gain time to move or put on the bayonet. Danny did not need protection, especially for a child who was still underage. The reason why he chose Malt as his protector was that he could not resist Carl Van Bate's pleading. Danny and the Minister of Construction had been neighbors for many years. They used to live in the same street in the New District, so he naturally knew that Van Bate regarded all the graduates as his own children. Since precision shooters were usually positioned at the rear, it was actually safer for the soldiers who were assigned to the front line to have a protector. Danny knew that His Majesty hated using connections or covering up for each other, and this was one of the few things he could do for His Majesty. Looking at Malt squatting on the ground, Danny could not help asking, "Have you ever thought of changing your job?" Leave the First Army? Malt said without raising his head. No, I quite like it here. This isn't a game. Danny raised his eyebrows. We can die on the battlefield at any time. You don't have to take this risk. Anyone who graduates from Car Academy can work in City Hall. The salary there is no lower than that of the First Army, and it's very decent. But I don't want to run errands for those officials all day. I want to protect His Majesty. The short man piled up the 8mm in front of the trench. And he suddenly paused and his face became a little red. Because of Miss Nana? Malt did not answer, but his face became even redder. Danny couldn't help laughing. At least one person in the First Army admires Miss Angel. Even if there's a queue, it won't be your turn. What's more, her father is a baron. Even if he loses his fief, he's still not someone you can reach. I don't think so, Malt said stubbornly. As long as I can see her every day, I'll be satisfied. Danny shook his head and stopped trying to persuade her. He knew how stubborn people could be when they were deeply in love, because he was the same. Whenever he was free, as long as he closed his eyes, the figure of the green-robed woman would appear in his mind. If she had not saved him, he would have lost his life in the forest. At that time, she was still the devil's claw, the embodiment of evil. Danny buried all of this deep in her heart, not daring to tell anyone. Unexpectedly, when they met again, the witch had already been cleared of her wrongdoings and became an innocent person. She also lived in the castle district's witch building, and also opened up a variety of experimental fields in the concealing forest. He could not enter the castle district at will, so on his days off, he always picked up a hunting bow and went to the concealing forest to hunt. Dan even thought that if one day he no longer served as a soldier, he would apply for a job as a forest ranger from City Hall and regard the concealing forest as his new home. Woo-woo! Just then a horn sounded. This was the signal that the enemy was coming. Danny put down his thoughts and set up his saddle again. No matter what, he was still a warrior, fighting to protect His Majesty and overthrow the church that hunted witches. As the sun gradually rose, a group of people in shining armor appeared at the foot of the mountain. In order to surround the only mountain road, the defense line was less than 1 kilometer away from the Hermes Mountain. From the moment they went down the mountain, they had already entered the attack range of the cannons. Danny knew that Sir Iron Axe would not let go of any opportunity to attack the enemy. As if to confirm his conjecture, a dull roar suddenly sounded from behind him. It sounded like thunder coming from afar, and he could even see a blurry shadow flying over his head, flying in the direction of the enemy. The battle began without warning. Because of the long distance, Danny could clearly see the landing point of the shells. When the shells hit the ground, the mud stirred up was like a cluster of blooming wildflowers. The long line of ants suddenly fell into a panic. It was normal for them to feel panic when they could not even see the enemy for the first time. If they were ordinary mercenaries or militias, their morale would completely collapse after a few rounds of bombardment. However, the army of the church did not retreat. They began to move forward and the formation became looser. When Danny could see the enemy's clothes and weapons more clearly, this group of people had at least suffered 3 rounds of bombardment. The position formed by 50 field cannons was enough to make the bombardment continuous, which was definitely a difficult experience for the enemy. They did not have horses, so they had to walk this road to hell on their feet. The God's Punishment Army, which was rumored to have infinite strength, raised their giant shields and stood at the front of the line, forming a gray iron wall about 500 or 600 meters away from the first trench. However, the shells did not mean much to them. As long as they could hit the giant shields, the shields would be torn apart and the enemies behind them would be thrown to the ground. We can't go on like this. Danny shook his head. I'm afraid they'll be completely defeated before they reach the first trench. He was very clear about the firepower arrangement of the position. First, they would use artillery to greet the enemies within 1,000 to 500 meters. When the enemies gathered in front of the barbed wire, they would use machine guns to clean up the battlefield. The revolving wheels would only be used for close combat after the enemies charged and would not be fired within 200 meters. Isn't it good to be defeated? Malt stood on tiptoe and looked out of the trench. Of course, I won't get anything if I do that. Danny swept the weapons into his waist bag and was ready to leave. Where are you going? The short man hurriedly pulled him. The trench further ahead. He shook off the latter's hand. Just stay here. I'll go with you. Don't follow me. This is the captain's order. After saying this, Danny aimed at his waist and touched the longitudinal trench. The sound of shells hitting the ground became louder and louder. With every dull thud, some dirt slid down from both sides of the trench and poured into his collar. He knew he was approaching the front of the battlefield little by little. After crossing 3 horizontal trenches in a row, Danny took advantage of the moment when a new round of shells hit the ground and looked out, ignoring the strange looks from the other team members. He could clearly see the giant shields of the God's Punishment Army. He could even hear the enemy's hoarse shouts and shouts. The distance was about 400 meters. It was close enough. Danny took a deep breath, set up his rifle, aimed at the position slightly above the upper edge of the shield, and pulled the trigger. With a crisp sound, a string of blue blood rose behind the shield. He saw the giant shield and the shield-bearer fall to the ground with a loud crash, revealing the bewildered judgment warriors behind them. He pulled the bolt, removed the steaming shell, and then pushed it back to its original position with a click. The sound of bullets being loaded made his blood boil. Chapter 6:13. In a few seconds, he kept aiming and shooting until he used up all the bullets in his clip. 2 more giant shields fell down. Danny would not waste his precious bullets on the judgment warriors. Their thin armor looked mighty, but it could not even withstand a flintlock. Lord Iron Axe once said that the God's Punishment Army of the Church was a terrible opponent. One of them could fight 10 enemies at close range. However, they were few in number and difficult to train. That was why they were worth hunting. The reason why he hated machine gunners was that those arrogant guys used the same bullets as him, but their efficiency was shockingly low. In the only 2 live-fire exercises, a machine gun squad emptied several boxes of bullets within an hour. Even Lord Iron Axe felt sorry for them. However, judging from the damage of the targets, they had only shot over 100 bullets, which was a complete waste of resources in Danny's eyes. Of course, he also understood the significance of the Mark I machine gun. At least when dealing with enemies swarming like a tide, it could stop the momentum of the attack. However, when it came to hunting results, it still depended on these accurate shooters. 1 bullet for 1 enemy. This was what he had been training himself strictly for. Danny pulled out the magazine and reloaded it skillfully. When he was about to stand up and shoot, he suddenly heard someone panting beside him. He looked sideways and found it was Malt. Damn it. Didn't I tell you to stay where you are? He glared at the short man. You're violating the military order. Lord Brian said that we can't leave our posts unless there's a special situation. You also violated the military order. Malt wiped the sweat from his forehead. As a protector, I have to stay with you. Danny resisted the urge to beat him up. He grabbed a handful of bullets from his waist bag and threw them in front of him. Put them in the magazine. Don't show your head unless necessary. Sir. The short man grinned and saluted. Just when he got the 5th kill, the enemy's formation suddenly changed. Perhaps the church commander also believed that they would not be able to reach the front of the trenches at this rate. The God's Punishment Army threw down their giant shields and rushed toward the trenches at an astonishing speed. Even a galloping horse was no match for them. The distance between the 2 sides was rapidly shortening. The revolving rifles and machine guns fired at the same time. In an instant, a series of blood mists appeared in front of Danny, and the dust raised on the ground was even denser than when the cannons were bombarded. It was as if an invisible giant hand had slapped the charging warriors. In the face of this unstoppable force, the momentum of the charging warriors was abruptly slowed down. Those who bumped into it were all sent flying, and blood splashed everywhere. A soldier of the God's Punishment Army, whose arm was broken by a bullet, was still running forward. As soon as Danny aimed his gun at him, a sand snake, made of dozens of dust columns, passed through the center of his body. That was the unique trajectory of a machine gun. The target's chest immediately began to sway like water ripples. Blue blood exploded behind him, and the scorching heat even tore apart his ribs. The god's punishment soldier, who had lost his balance, crumpled like a rag and fell to the ground after running for 3 or 4 steps due to inertia. Danny noticed that his back was already rotten. "Captain, be careful!" Malt suddenly screamed. Danny was shocked. As soon as he turned his head, he saw another soldier of the god's punishment army coming out of the smoke and raising his short spear at him. Then the enemy bent over and threw him out. Danny could barely see the shadow of the spear. He was too careless. The enemy noticed him because he was too focused on watching. A hunter should not expose himself to the sight of the prey for a long time. Before Danny could react, Malt had already hit him hard. The two fell to the bottom of the trench together. At the same time, there was a bang above their heads. Danny felt a sharp pain in the back of his head, and his body was completely covered by the mud. The sound of gunfire was far away from him in an instant, and his ears were echoing with an uncomfortable buzzing sound. After a long time, he recovered his breath and reached out to touch the back of his head. There was a sticky feeling. He must have hit something hard when he fell, but he was still conscious, so it should not be a big problem. In his hazy vision, a comrade rushed to him. "Hey, are you okay?" His voice sounded very vague, so he could only reluctantly wave his hand to show that he was fine. "Come and help me. 2 people are injured here," the comrade shouted. After a while, several people surrounded him, and they worked together to drag him and Malt out of the collapsed mud. At this time, Danny noticed that the short spear had opened a crescent-shaped gap on the edge of the trench. The spear did not jump over the trench, but hit the edge of the trench, penetrated the thin layer of soil, and pierced into the wall of the trench. The mud on the 2 people was caused by the collapse of the place where the spear hit. However, when he moved his eyes to Malt, he could not help but feel nervous. There was a bowl-sized bloody wound on the short man's shoulder, and his arm was almost falling off. Only a few strands of skin were connected to the body, and the white bones were clearly visible. The spear did not cause no harm, but fell on Malt. Everyone in the First Army threw themselves into the battle again, leaving only one person to give first aid to the seriously injured person. Everyone in the First Army knew that as long as they did not die immediately, Miss Nana would be able to heal them until the end of the battle. Therefore, stopping bleeding and dressing wounds were compulsory courses in the First Army. The soldier decisively took out a dagger and cut off Malt's arm. Then he sprinkled the herbs in his bag evenly on the wound, and finally bandaged it with gauze. After a while, the originally unconscious short man was awakened by the pain and let out a weak moan. "Lie down and don't move. You won't die," the soldier comforted him. "Captain Danny, where's the captain?" "I'm here." Danny clenched his teeth and crawled to his side on his weak limbs. "Why did you do it for me? I'm your protector. I can't leave you alone." Malt's mouth opened and closed slightly. "How about it? I didn't neglect my duty, did I?" Danny suddenly felt an indescribable sense of remorse. "No. You did a good job." "Is that so?" The little man smiled with difficulty. "So I can see Miss Nana." "Yes, both of you can see her." The soldier looked at Danny. "Can you take care of him? I have to go back to my seat." "I can. Thank you." He nodded. After the soldier left, Danny slowly picked up his gun, shook off the mud on it, and struggled to stand up. He could still fight. The enemy would pay for this wound with blood. However, there was no approaching army of the church in sight. In the pervading smoke and dust, the enemy was retreating in a panic, leaving only vague figures. The trenches were already filled with cheers. Chapter 6:14. The gunboat slowly docked at the dock. When Roland walked out of the cabin, he could not help but be attracted by the scenery in front of him. Curved rocks stretched out from both sides, like a pair of giant hands wrapping the whole town. Looking up, there was only a 5-finger-wide line in the sky. The sun shone through the gap like a golden wall of light. Countless vines hung down from the bottom of the rocks like emerald green hair. Some of the thick vines even fell to the ground, making people want to climb them. When the light penetrated the dense branches and left spots of light on the flowing river, Roland felt as if he was in an undeveloped jungle. However, this place was not completely deserted. Along the silent river, all kinds of artificial buildings extended on both sides. The townspeople shuttled back and forth among the waist-high broad-leaved bushes. Smoke curled up from kitchen chimneys, creating an indescribable beauty of harmony. Due to the lack of sunlight, the temperature here was a few degrees lower than outside, and the color of the plants was much richer. It was not difficult to understand why it was called Deep Valley Town. When Roland and the witches stepped onto the moss-covered dock, a group of people was already waiting there. The three leaders were naturally Iron Axe, the commander-in-chief of the First Army, Car Owen, the Duke of the Northern Region, and his daughter Edith. "We meet again, Your Majesty." Edith curtsied and said, "Congratulations on winning the first battle. I heard the report when I was on the ship. You did a good job." Roland nodded approvingly. "I heard from Iron Axe that you ensured sufficient food supply and ammunition transportation, and that you did a good job in deceiving the enemy. This is what the Kant family should do." She smiled and said, "The merchants of the Northern Region are very happy to serve you." However, half a year ago, the owner of this place was still Timothy Wimbledon. Roland thought to himself, the merchants here probably haven't even heard of my name. The so-called willing to serve should also be Edith's means. She could drive the merchants of 3 cities to complete this plan. Her control over the Northern Region was indeed extraordinary. After some encouragement, he looked at Iron Axe and asked, "Have the battle results come out?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Iron Axe saluted and said, "The detailed report is in your office." "Office? Room?" "I've negotiated with Earl Hire. When you stay in Deep Valley Town, his castle will be your temporary palace." Edith added, "In addition, I've asked someone to redecorate the study according to the layout of the border area. I've knocked down a wall facing the sun and installed a floor-to-ceiling window. I heard from Miss Maggie that you like a transparent room." "Is that so?" Roland asked with interest. "What about the Count himself?" "In order not to interfere with your work, he will stay in the mansion in the suburbs." The Pearl of the Northern Region paused. "Do you need me to summon him?" "No, if he doesn't like to get involved in politics." He waved his hand. "Let's go to the castle first." "Yes, please follow me." Was this the taste of power? Roland smacked his lips. It wasn't bad to experience it occasionally. When he walked into the renovated study, he felt that he was back in Neverwinter. Even the spacious mahogany table and the recliner in the corner of the room had been replicated. The only striking difference was the view outside the floor-to-ceiling window. One was the gray impassable mountain range, and the other was the secluded valley covered with green leaves. He wondered how the former owner, Earl Hire, would feel after he left. Roland returned to the table and sat down. He began to read the battle results. Although he had learned about the process of the battle in advance, he still felt a strong sense of excitement when he saw the casualty report of the church. This was definitely a victory worth remembering. The death of 156 God's Punishment warriors had fundamentally dispelled his worries about the God's Punishment army. This kind of powerful and fearless killing machine was not invincible. Their bodies made of flesh and blood were still no match for steel and gunpowder. Considering that the God's Punishment army needed to be transformed with witch blood, the number of God's Punishment army would not be too large. According to Agatha's estimation, as long as the bloody moon did not come, this special army should have no more than 1,500 people. 1/10 of the casualties should be enough to make the church suffer for a long time. In addition, more than 300 Judgment Army soldiers were killed, more than 20 were seriously injured, and 4 commanders were captured. These results were just the icing on the cake. Although most of the Judgment warriors were strong-willed and had excellent fighting skills, there was not much difference between them and the knight, so Roland did not take them seriously. Fortunately, they did not encounter any troublesome pure witches in this defensive battle. Otherwise, they might not have been able to win if they only relied on Sylvie and Iffy to hold the line. In fact, according to Sylvie's instructions, the machine gun squad that focused on the attack was used to deal with the pervasive pure witches. What about the casualties of the First Army? Roland closed the statistics. 2 were killed and 21 were seriously injured, Iron Axe said in a low voice. All the casualties were caused by the spear throwing of the God's Punishment Army. Now the wounded have recovered and returned to the team. After learning that the church had taken action, Lightning immediately sent Nana to Deep Valley Town. In terms of post-war rescue, Miss Angel's ability was irreplaceable. Roland knocked on the table and said, "Arrange a ship to send the bodies of the sacrificed soldiers back to Neverwinter for burial." Iron Axe agreed and hesitated for a moment. "Your Majesty, how do you plan to deal with Danny, the captain of the 4th Precision Archer Team? The old hunter who shot 5 God's Punishment Army soldiers to death." Roland picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Even the taste was familiar to him. "What do you think?" During the rescue process, the report that Danny and his protector were injured and their positions did not match the arrangement immediately attracted Brian's attention. During the summary of the battle that night, Roland received the news through the sigil of listening. However, considering that the battle had just ended, the First Army was still in a celebratory mood, and the protector was seriously injured, he just asked Iron Axe to take care of the wounded first and discuss the matter when he arrived at Deep Valley Town. "I think that although Danny violated the rules by leaving his position without permission, he also made a great achievement. The record of killing 5 Scourge alone is enough to make him a star in the army. The 2 achievements should offset each other." Iron Axe said slowly, "In Iron Sand City, such a brave warrior will also be rewarded by the Master, so." "But the First Army is not an old-fashioned army that rewards people based on their heads," Roland interrupted. "Do you remember what I taught you in the first training session?" Iron Axe swallowed and said, "It's discipline, Your Majesty." Chapter 6:15. Interrogation. If he doesn't pose a threat, he'll be relieved of his duty, his monthly salary will be deducted, and he'll be confined for 15 days. If he does pose a threat, he'll be expelled from the First Army and be judged by you, Your Majesty. Iron Axe immediately replied, "Well, you've memorized it well. That's it." Since there was no military court yet, Roland had to personally interrogate all the major offenses in the army, and Danny's violation of discipline was obviously not serious enough. But considering that we're at the critical moment of the war, lock him up for 5 days first, and then execute the rest after we return to Neverwinter. Yes, Your Majesty. You don't have to worry about the reaction of the soldiers. This is an excellent example of propaganda. No matter what merits he has made, as long as he violates the rules during the mission, he'll definitely be punished. Roland paused for a moment. Of course, the army won't forget his military exploits. If anyone asks, just tell them I have my own arrangements. In fact, Roland was partly to blame for this incident. Although he had built a team of 50 precision shooters, he did not separate these talented shooters from the ordinary gun battalion. When he arranged them, he just placed them on both sides of the trench as a kind of revolving rifle with a longer range to block the enemies who tried to sneak into the machine gun bunker from the edge of the trench. Danny, on the other hand, was more like a sniper. He could freely choose his position, fire freely, and wait for the opportunity to eliminate the most valuable target among the enemies. Roland had considered setting up a special sniper team, but the latter had higher requirements on firearms, ammunition, and personnel, especially the personnel. This was especially true for the personnel. Putting aside the subjective initiative, he first had to ensure that the snipers would not directly lose contact after being released, or that they would passively avoid combat. Maybe after this war, he could make some improvements on the basis of the precision shooters. By the way, Your Majesty, I got some special information from the captive church commander. Iron Axe seemed to be considering his words. It's related to the God's Punishment Army. What is it? They said that the God's Punishment Army can't act alone. These warriors can only complete the most basic task under the command of a commander. Roland turned around. Is there anything else? Ashes had also mentioned this point. It was for this reason that he dared to lead the whole army to the north and force the church to form a team. Otherwise, if the church only sent a small group of God's Punishment Army to break up the whole army and create chaos everywhere in the kingdom, it would be enough to make him suffer. The controller can be an ordinary person or a pure one, but once it's decided, it can't be changed. Iron Axe recalled. The newly promoted soldiers of the God's Punishment Army would complete the ceremony on the top floor of the Hermes Cathedral. One of the captives even admitted that he had personally participated in this secret meeting. Roland immediately ordered, "Take me to see them, and call Agatha along the way." In the depths of the dungeon, Roland saw the 4 prisoners who were imprisoned separately. If the surface of Deep Valley Town was only cool and pleasant, the underground was damp and cold. The 4 of them were blindfolded and their hands were tied behind their backs. Their bodies were drenched, and although there were no visible wounds, they were trembling uncontrollably. Obviously, Iron Axe used his unique interrogation technique again. According to him, few people could survive a day under torture. However, the believers of the church were different from the common interrogators. Their respect for God made them more strong-willed. "Only the 2 on the right are willing to confess," the Sand Nation said in a low voice. "One of them is the presiding judge of the church, and the other is the priest of the holy city. The other 2 don't want to say anything. Of course, they don't know that their companion has confessed." Roland did not know much about the system and positions of the church, so he asked directly, "Who participated in the ceremony of the God's Punishment Army? Take him to the interrogation room." The priest was quickly dragged into a small room next door by the jailer. Iron Axe poured a ladle of cold water on his head. "Ferret, now I have a few questions to ask you." He trembled all over and then opened his mouth slightly. "I've told you everything I know. Kill me now." The priest's voice was weak and hoarse, as if he had suffered a great deal of pain. "Tell me about the God's Punishment Army. How is the ceremony held?" Ferret shook his head and did not answer. "Listen, this is the last interrogation." Iron Axe bent down and whispered in his ear. "Answer all the questions, and then I'll set you free." After a long silence, he said again, "The ceremony is usually held in the Tower of Babel. Only Scourge, the Pope, and the Controller are allowed to enter. The scene must be quiet to ensure that nothing goes wrong." "But," Roland asked, "because the new warriors will recognize the Controller by the sound. The first sound they hear. It can be more than one." Ferret gasped. "The selected controllers will recite the hymn together. Within a certain time, all of them will be accepted by Scourge. What about you? Are you also a controller?" "I'm in charge of a small team of 10 Scourge. But those 10 people also have to follow the orders of their superiors, right?" The priest nodded. "All the God's Punishment Army will follow the orders of His Holiness the Pope." "I see," Roland thought. At first, he thought it would be through brainwave connection or telepathy to command this mindless army, but it turned out to be voice control. This layered method was undoubtedly extremely complicated and inefficient. Not to mention the fact that sound waves were easily attenuated, the God's Punishment Army would not be able to respond if there was a conflict between the command of a small team and that of the commander-in-chief. "You said once the controller is determined, he can't change it. What if Scourge loses all his controllers?" Agatha suddenly asked. Hearing a woman's voice, Ferret was obviously stunned. "Answer." Iron Axe scooped up another ladle of water. "I don't know." "You're lying." Roland soon received a hint from Nightingale. "If you don't want to stay in the dungeon for half a month, you'd better not play this game." The priest gritted his teeth. "They will go to the barbarian land on their own. That's all I know." "The barbarian land?" Agatha asked in surprise. "That's what I've heard. Usually, in this kind of situation, other warriors will quickly go to stop it, but..." He hesitated for a moment. "It's rumored that a long time ago, some God's Punishment warriors who weren't properly controlled escaped to the barbarian land and never came back. Do you know how the God's Punishment Army is transformed?" "Well, only His Holiness is qualified to host the promotion ceremony." "Then how does the Pope transfer control of the God's Punishment Army when he abdicates?" Ferret's forehead beaded with sweat. "I don't know. How on earth was the church founded 400 years ago? Have you heard of the name Alice? What about the Union? What about tequila? After that, No matter how Agatha asked, the priest could not answer a word. He really doesn't know. Let's go, Roland said after getting confirmation from Nightingale. There's no point in continuing the trial. When they left the dungeon, Iron Axe caught up with them and asked, Your Majesty, the captives of the church. Chapter 616. Back in the castle, Roland looked at Agatha and asked, Do you remember anything? The God's Punishment Army should have been successfully researched after the fall of Tequila, so I don't know much about it. She slowly shook her head. But it may not be as simple as the church priest said. At least this method can't explain how the new pope took over the previous God's Punishment Army. 09 small say net. In addition, it's also very strange that the God's Punishment Army would take the initiative to go to the barbarian land. After a short pause, Agatha continued, The barbarian land you mentioned should be the fertile plains 400 years ago. There is nothing there except the ruins of the holy city. It's too far to say that they were attracted by the demons. Who knows? Roland said carelessly, You also saw that they have blue blood, so they can't be regarded as the same kind as us. He was not interested in what attracted the God's Punishment Army. At present, what he wanted to know most was the weakness of the God's Punishment Army and how to effectively prevent Scourge from attacking the front. After all, judging from the wave of spears, the God's Punishment Army was quite a threat in the absence of fortifications. If the God's Punishment Army is really controlled by sound, perhaps Echo's ability can. I don't agree with this, the ancient witch rejected. There is a great risk. Indeed, it is very dangerous to sneak near the controller, but we can. No, I'm not talking about Echo, Agatha interrupted him. I'm talking about you. Roland was startled. If you want Echo to sneak near the controller, you must rely on Nightingale's mist. In this way, you will have no protection around you. As long as the church sends a pure witch with special ability, they can easily kill you. She said without hesitation, Although you are a mortal, weak and powerless, it seems that if you want to defeat the demons, you are still indispensable for the time being. So protecting yourself is the most important thing. We can't take any risks. I really can't tell if you're praising or belittling me, Roland couldn't help but laugh bitterly. When that time comes, I'll wear a God's Stone of Retaliation. The God's Stone of Retaliation is just an insurance. It's not an absolutely safe barrier, Agatha said bluntly. Even Nightingale can't guarantee absolute safety. It's just that we don't have a better way. As long as I am alive, His Majesty will not be harmed. Nightingale could not help but reveal herself. It was obvious that she was quite dissatisfied with Agatha's words. I hope so. The ancient witch did not continue to argue about this. Instead, she turned around and left the study. However, when she reached the door, she stopped. What's wrong? Roland asked. Agatha was silent for a moment. I don't know if I should say this or not. The reason why Lady Alice could become the Queen of Starfall City and the head of the three chiefs is not only because of her extremely powerful strength, but also because she is smarter and more resourceful than most witches. Several of her decisions have saved the Union from collapse. Without Alice, Tequila would not have survived until then. Many people believe that if she had been born on the eve of the first battle of divine will, perhaps this hopeless war would have been ended long ago. What are you trying to say? She turned around and frowned slightly. What I want to say is that the super warrior she placed her hopes on to save the witches shouldn't be like this. Do you think that the current God's Punishment Army is not necessarily the same as the God's Punishment Army 400 years ago? Roland asked in surprise. Scourge is not afraid of magic power, doesn't panic, and has infinite strength. It seems that he does have a greater advantage over the demons, but he can't be the final nail in the coffin. What's more, he needs a manipulator to accompany him. He has almost no ability to conduct long-distance raids. I think Lady Alice shouldn't place high hopes on such a warrior. Agatha sighed. Of course, these are just my guesses. I'm afraid only the church knows what happened to the Union after the destruction of Tequila. Roland had not recovered from his contemplation for a long time after she left. What Agatha said was indeed reasonable. Was the God's punishment army plan, which forced the Queen of Starfall City to pay such a high price, really just to produce a kind of expensive and inconvenient killing machine? Just as he was about to go outside the castle for a breath of fresh air, the sigil of listening on Nightingale suddenly rang. This is lightning. Northwest, above Coldwind Ridge. The enemy is retreating. I repeat, the enemy is retreating. Retreating. They're all fleeing toward the direction of the holy city, Ku. Maggie added. I see. Roland immediately called the guards outside the door. Inform Iron Axe, Edith, Carr, Duke Wen, and all the members of the advisor department to come to the castle for a meeting. This is undoubtedly good news, he thought excitedly. He did not expect that the defeated army of the church would give up Coldwind Ridge and directly retreat to Hermes Plateau. In this way, he would have the opportunity to evacuate the people in the town before the holy city reoccupied Coldwind Ridge. They're afraid, Nightingale laughed. Maybe so. But the retreat also means that the holy city can't send reinforcements in a short time. Roland touched his chin. Our previous speculation was right. This team of more than 1,000 people should be the vanguard force that the Pope sent at the last minute. If they don't take the initiative to attack the defense line, I really can't do anything to the church. In a sense, choosing this plan was equivalent to giving up Coldwind Ridge. After all, it was much closer to Hermes Plateau. Now that there was a chance to prevent the townspeople from becoming victims of the pill of madness, Roland suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. The relevant personnel quickly gathered in the reception hall. He repeated the information sent by Lightning and looked around. Any other questions? Your Majesty, why don't you directly defend Coldwind Ridge? The Duke was puzzled. The terrain there is dangerous, and there's only one road to the holy city. Isn't it more advantageous than guarding at the foot of the mountain? It looks dangerous, but in fact, it's surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. The slope just passes over the top of Coldwind Ridge. As long as a rope, we can easily penetrate behind the defense line. Roland spread his hands. We've discussed this in detail in Neverwinter. You can ask Edith about the details. What about the others? Seeing that no one answered, he directly ordered, then the evacuation will be carried out by the First Army. The stored food and the Golden Dragon can be put aside for now. The key is the residents. Whether I persuade them, I want to see no one left in Coldwind Ridge. In addition, the persuasion of the local nobles will be more effective, especially the famous Pearl of the Northern region. He paused. Iron Axe, Edith, you two are responsible for this together. Yes. As you wish. As for the general staff. He looked at Count Schilt and the others. Your task is to help the Duke of the Northern region settle down the evacuated residents, including counting the number of people, registering their identities, and arranging housing and food. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty, everyone answered in unison. Chapter 617. Wavering Faith. Holy City of Hermes, Cathedral Tower. Please search to see the full list. The novel of the day. The guard's hurried footsteps broke the silence of the ring hall. The sound of iron boots landing on the marble floor was clear and loud. Taifun put down the breakfast in his hand with a bit of dissatisfaction and looked at the flustered newcomer. What's the matter? Your Excellency, something happened in Coldwind Ridge, the guard whispered. Lord Solidal seems to have suffered a serious injury over there. Then he told Roland what he had heard as quickly as he could. What did you say? Taifun was so surprised that he could not believe his ears. Half of the vanguard was lost, and Soli was seriously injured? The old bishop grabbed the guard and asked, where is he now? He's already been sent to the relief center. What about the God's punishment army? They have been ordered to stay put and wait. They are now gathered in the church hall. Inform His Holiness the Pope and Lord Eyre immediately and report this to them. Also, gather the people who went out for this expedition and keep them under surveillance. Close the door of the church and forbid other believers from entering or leaving. He did not even have breakfast. I'm going to the charity right now. Yes, sir. How could this be? Taifun felt his heart pounding. They were a team of 1,300 people, and 300 of them were Scourge. Logically speaking, they should have no problem dealing with Coldwind Ridge. Before Soli was promoted to bishop, he had been a battle-hardened presiding judge and one of His Holiness Main's most capable subordinates. Even if they had encountered demons or beasts, they wouldn't have lost so many people. Despite the waves of shock in his heart, the old bishop was very clear that the most important thing at the moment was to block the news and prevent his faith from being shaken. Secondly, he had to find out what Soli Dal had encountered in Coldwind Ridge as soon as possible. When he arrived at the orphanage, El was already there. It was obvious that El had another source of information. The two of them exchanged glances and walked into Soli's infirmary with solemn expressions. A pure which was applying medicine to the injured archbishop. One of his arms was missing and the wound was tightly bandaged. Soli's confused eyes suddenly became focused when he saw the other two archbishops. He struggled to sit up. "You can leave now." Tay Fun helped him up after letting the pure witch leave. "How's your injury?" "I want to see His Holiness Main." Soli growled. "Take me to the pivotal secret section." "Tell us what happened first," El said coldly. "Then we'll decide whether to send you to the Pope or throw you into the dungeon and wait to be judged by the arbitral tribunal." "Bastard, now is not the time to bicker," he said, gnashing his teeth. "Coldwind Ridge is a trap. Roland Wimbledon's firearms are much more terrible than Timothy's. I must let His Holiness know. I don't want to be kept in the dark and have to clean up after you, Mr. Soli Dal." El's voice suddenly rose a few octaves. "Do you know how pathetic you look when you come back? When we passed through the city gate, everyone saw the incomplete and dispirited advance army. Some people in the Holy City have already inquired about it. If I hadn't asked the arbitral tribunal to arrest a few busybodies, I'm afraid this damn rumor would have caused an uproar in the whole city tomorrow." She grabbed the archbishop's collar. "You should know how serious this is." Tayfun knew that El was right. The loss of more than 100 God's punishment soldiers was almost equal to the total loss of the church in the past 2 years. The enemy was just a small town in the mountains. This was definitely a disgrace to the church. What was more fatal was that once the news spread, the confidence of the believers would suffer a heavy blow. Since the God's punishment army was sent to fight against demonic beasts, this kind of invincible warrior had been rumored to be invincible. It seemed that this was the case. Even the terrifying and cruel giant demonic beasts were no match for the God's punishment army. What kind of enemy could defeat them? Just as he was about to say a few words, the door of the ward was suddenly pushed open. "I hope I'm not too late." The white-haired witch Zero walked in. "His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff wants to see you and asks you not to disclose the specific situation of the battle for the time being. Can you walk by yourself?" "Lady Zero, we can't," El protested. Zero interrupted her. "Don't worry. The Supreme Pontiff is just worried that the secret of the God's punishment army may be leaked. After he asks about this, I'll tell you the whole story." "What secret?" "I can't tell you." Zero smiled. "Because I don't know either. I can walk." Soli struggled to get out of bed, but he fell to the ground after taking only 2 steps. "Don't try to be brave." The pure witch snapped her fingers. Immediately, 2 machine-operated guards in blue cloaks walked in and lifted him up. "When we reach the pivotal secret area, you can move freely in a wheelchair." "Damn bitch." After Soli and Zero left, El spat fiercely and walked out of the medical room without looking back. Tayfun looked at the back of the pure witch with a gloomy expression and did not speak for a long time. Walking along the stone steps into the deep hollow under the church, Soli became excited. Apparently, it was his first time to come to the core area of the church. Even his breathing became faster. This time, the God's punishment army suffered a heavy loss. How are you going to explain it to His Excellency Main? After changing to a wheelchair, Zero personally pushed him to the forbidden area. This failure was indeed caused by my carelessness. I'll accept any punishment. The Archbishop hesitated. Moreover, I want to apply to His Holiness to become a scourge. Are you sure? You want to give up the position of a bishop and become a puppet of the God's punishment army? They're not puppets. Soli could not help arguing. Every scourge is a brave and determined warrior. That's why they've dedicated their lives to fight for the glory of the church. But I've failed them and brought immeasurable losses to the church. The best way to make up for it is to personally devote myself to make up for my mistakes. Really? Zero shrugged. But I don't think the Pope will agree to your application. I'll try my best to persuade him. I believe that His Excellency Maine will definitely. That's not the reason. She shook her head. Transforming into a god's punishment army requires witch blood, which is hard to come by. Now that you've lost your arm, even if the transformation is successful, your combat ability will be greatly reduced. Tell me, how could the Pope waste witch blood on a defective product? What did you say? Wait, stop. Zero pushed the wheelchair through the long corridor and stopped at the end of the forbidden area. Is there a problem? The transformation ceremony of the God's Punishment Army is a secret that only His Holiness knows. How do you know what the ceremony requires? Soli widened his eyes. His Excellency Maine would never tell you this. You're right, he wouldn't. After the Imperial Guard opened the cage, Zero calmly pushed him into the cage. And I don't need him to tell me because I'm the Pope. Chapter 6:18. Deafening roars could be heard everywhere. Zero could only hear faint screams and cries of pain in the gaps. In front of them was the shield formation formed by the Scourge, and behind them was the slowly advancing Judgment Army. This formation was originally rehearsed to deal with the attack of demonic beasts, but the giant shield was equally effective against crossbows and flintlocks. The iron shield as thick as a finger was enough to block the volley of crossbows, and Timothy's imitation flintlocks could not penetrate it. The only drawback was that it was too heavy, and only the God's Punishment Army could carry it in battle. But now it was ineffective. From time to time, a scourge would be smashed into two by the whizzing iron balls, and the people behind them would also suffer. Soon, a mist of blood would float up from the wounds. The warriors who did not die on the spot would hold their internal organs or hands and feet and wail in pain, constantly wearing down the morale of their comrades. We can't go on like this. Let the God's Punishment Army charge. The deputy shouted. Yes, Lord Soli. Another commander clenched his fists. The iron balls can only advance in a straight line, and they can't be shot fast. The right thing to do is to disperse. We can't be targets anymore. I got it. Pass down my order. Disperse the formation and charge. Zero heard Soli Dal give the order to attack. But at this moment, a new weapon joined the battlefield. Its sound was like incessant raindrops, and also like the buzzing sound of metal clashing. The front line was suddenly covered by the raised smoke and dust, and the charging warriors fell to the ground like wheat being cut down. Zero could not even see where the attack came from. The commanders' faces suddenly turned pale. Everyone knew that the outcome of this battle had been decided. Suddenly, Zero heard an ear-piercing hissing sound. It was sharp and stealthy, like the hissing of a viper. Danger! She turned her eyes to the direction of the sound and subconsciously wanted to avoid it, but she remembered that this body did not belong to her. Unfortunately, Soli Dal was not as vigilant as she was. An iron ball fell from midair and smashed into the ground right in front of him. Then, it leaped up high and brushed past him. Zero felt her vision spin, and then she fell to the ground. Blood kept gushing out from Soli's shoulder. The place where his arm should have been was now empty. He clenched his teeth to prevent himself from screaming in pain. The people around him hurriedly surrounded him. Your Eminence! My God, God bless your hand, retreat! Let them all retreat. Take Lord Soli with you and leave this place. I'll bring up the rear. The memory was cut short. Zero opened her eyes. The god's stone prism and the pivotal secret temple appeared before her eyes again. So that's what happened. She lowered her head and couldn't help but open her mouth. If that was the case, everything made sense. Why was Roland Wimbledon able to become the new king of Grey Castle from an unknown border lord in just a year and a half? Why was he able to defeat the Duke's Knight Regiment and the Second Prince's crazed army in battle? Why was he able to conquer the king's city within a day? These were the reasons. The continuous roars and the smell of gunpowder all proved that they were a new type of firearm, Timothy's imitation snow powder tube, which couldn't even touch Roland's fur. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, Zero would never have imagined that snow powder weapons could exert such great power. Of course, she didn't believe that this was a secret passed down in the Wimbledon family. Otherwise, Timothy and Garcia would have known about it. There was no doubt that Roland had encountered something in Border Town that allowed him to achieve what he had today. Perhaps it was a hermit family that had mastered ancient secret skills. Since the disintegration of the Union, they had lost contact with some of the builders who had helped the local people. There were many skilled craftsmen among them, so it was possible that they had invented these exquisite tools. Or perhaps it was a relic hidden in the depths of the impassable mountain range. The history books in the library mentioned that there were some strange relics of unknown origin at the edge of the barbarian land. The final split of the Union was also caused by the discovery of an underground labyrinth. But she was more inclined to believe that it was the ability of a certain witch that could make ordinary snow powder extremely deadly. Because of this, Prince Roland changed his previous attitude and began to recruit witches and help them clear their grievances. But it didn't matter. No matter what the reason was, Roland Wimbledon must know it clearly. As long as she could devour Roland, she would definitely know the ins and outs of these weapons. Lady Zero? The captain of the guards at the exit of the cage could not help but worry when he saw that she had not moved for a long time. Zero suppressed the excitement in her heart and slowly walked out of the cage until the corners of her mouth had completely calmed down. "I'm fine." Inform the intelligence agency and ask them to recall all the pure witches in the Kingdom of Dawn. The captain was stunned. "But the plan you made before." "The final battle is about to begin," Zero said word by word. "I want to see each and every one of them." There was no doubt that the situation in the Kingdom of Dawn was insignificant compared to the things in Roland's head. It had great power, amazing shooting range, and could be used by ordinary people. Just thinking about it, one could understand its significance. If this weapon could be equipped on a large scale before the arrival of the Bloody Moon, the Holy City would have a much higher chance of winning against the demons. And she could also get closer to the divine will. Deep Valley Town, northern region of Grey Castle. After dinner, Iffy returned to her bedroom in the castle and could not help yawning. In the past half a month, apart from carrying out the tooth extraction operation, she had not been idle after arriving at the town. First, she helped the First Army guard the camp, and then she followed Edith and the others to Coldwind Ridge to relocate the local residents. Although she was very busy, her life was quite fulfilling. When she calmed down, she found that the non-combat witches did have their own unique advantages. Apart from ability, she was no different from most ordinary people. During their daily interactions, she was gradually accepted by the members of the Witch Union. Maggie, for the first time ever, even greeted her when they were on guard duty, although Lightning, who was standing beside her, did not seem to be happy about it. Iffy did not expect Maggie to forgive her. Instead, she planned to make up for the mistakes she had made in the past with actions. She did not even care whether she could become a sister in the end. Everything she did was to atone for her sins. To atone for her only friend, Annie. Just as Iffy was about to go to bed, someone knocked on the door. She opened the door and was surprised to find that it was the leader of Sleeping Island, Lady Tilly Wimbledon. Chapter 619. Genius in a Second. Remember, providing you with wonderful reading. Back in the room, Iffy quietly listened to Tilly's story about the establishment of the Bloodfang Association and Heidi Morgan's real purpose. When she heard that Annie was handed over to the nobles by Skyflare, she felt something clenched in her heart. Heidi. Where is she? She's been punished, Ashes, who was standing behind Tilly, replied. In addition, Skyflare tried to resist during the arrest process and went the same way as Heidi. Really? Thank you, Iffy said softly. She could not help but loosen her clenched fists and suddenly felt a little lost. Although the culprit who caused all this had paid the price, she did not feel too relieved. Instead, she felt a little lost because she had lost the target to vent her hatred on. And as the only one who was not punished, her sins were even heavier. I hope you can help Sleeping Island get back on the right track. Tilly paused for a moment and then said, the rest of the members of the Bloodfang Association are the same as you. They were all deceived and framed by Heidi. They shouldn't be implicated or discriminated against. It's indeed wrong for the combat witches to bully the assistant witches, but it won't be any better the other way around. Without much hesitation, Iffy nodded and said, I'm willing to help you. Probably not expecting her to agree so quickly, Tilly looked a little surprised. It's great that you can agree. What should I do? Just talk to the other members of the Bloodfang Association about the story between you and Annie. I'll disclose Heidi's crimes to everyone. Tilly said, after the church is completely eradicated, I'll send people to the kingdom of Wolfheart to search for the witches imprisoned by the nobles. If they're still alive, His Majesty will be responsible for rescuing them. I see. If there was any way to alleviate this sin, she would try her best to do it. Are you, all right? Tilly suddenly bent down and reached out her hand to wipe Iffy's cheek. Iffy immediately felt a warm flow on her face. I'm fine. She blinked her eyes. I'm just a little sleepy. The fifth princess looked at her silently for a long time. Don't be too sad. Rest well. It was not until their footsteps faded away that Iffy lay on the bed weakly. She did not cry. This is just a natural reaction of the body, she told herself. It had nothing to do with sorrow, nor was it cowardice. It was proof that she missed Annie. The tears flowed even faster. Roland sat in front of his desk and flipped through the evacuation statistics report of the General Staff Department. The flickering candlelight in front of his desk made him dizzy. It had been a long time since he tried to read at night, and now he was not used to it. He thought that he had brought civilization into modern times in advance, but when he arrived at Deep Valley Town, everything returned to its original state. There were no showers, no soap, no electric lights. This place wasn't much better than when he had first arrived in Border Town. The beginning of industrialization had only revealed the tip of the tip in the western region. If he wanted to spread chimneys and boilers all over the country, he still had a lot of work to do. Roland put down the report. Just as he was about to rub his eyes, a pair of soft, invisible hands had already reached out to his forehead and gently pinched it. Thank you. He tilted his head and mouthed, then continued to read the report. During the days when Barov was not around, Sir Schilt did a good job as an office assistant. At least when it came to counting the number of people and compiling the report, he did a very good job, not any worse than the specially trained young men in City Hall. How many people are willing to go to the western region? At least 70%, Your Majesty, Sir replied. Coldwind Ridge isn't a suitable place to live. I've asked His Excellency the Duke. If it wasn't to monitor the movements of the church, there wouldn't be a town there. Most of the remaining 30% have their own fields or industries in the northern region. Very well, you can make plans now. Try not to let the ships go back empty. Every time, bring a group of people back to the western region as soon as possible. But what about Carr and Duquesne? I'll explain it to him. Roland took a sip of tea. After all, after the war, no matter who wins or loses, there's no need to station people in Coldwind Ridge. What's wrong, Your Majesty? Schilt asked in confusion. No. Nothing. Just as he said, no matter who wins or loses, Nightingale suddenly covered his mouth gently, making him swallow his words. Then you just do as I say. Yes, Your Majesty. Just as the old sir was about to leave, the guard Sean pushed open the door and walked in. His Majesty, there's a woman outside the castle who wants to see you, but was stopped by the guards. She knelt on the ground and said that she won't leave until she sees you. Now. He subconsciously looked out of the window. The whole town had fallen into a quiet night. Yes, she seems to have deliberately waited until now. I've seen her twice in the castle district during the day and... Sean hesitated. She calls herself Mrs. Wimbledon. Hearing this answer, Roland almost choked on his own saliva. This is impossible. As far as he knew, Prince Roland had never been to the northern region. How could he have a lover out of nowhere? However, words alone were no proof. After thinking for a while, he decided to summon her in to ask. Firstly, it could dispel Nightingale's doubts. Secondly, he was really curious. If the woman was a noble, he could say that she was pursuing romance. However, if she was just a commoner, such a lie would be a serious crime. When the woman walked into the study, Roland's eyes suddenly lit up. Her appearance was not particularly outstanding, but her facial features were unique. Her short and thin body had an inexplicable sense of steadiness and gentleness. In layman's terms, she was obviously not old, but she looked like a housewife with excellent housekeeping skills. The dirty mud on her long dress served as a perfect contrast between her weakness and strength. "Your Majesty," the woman bowed and said, "Olivia of Coldwind Ridge sends her greetings to you. I want to know, what's the matter with your so-called Mrs. Wimbledon?" Roland went straight to the point. "According to the guards, you deliberately waited until late at night to come to the castle. If you want to deceive me in this name, you should know the consequences, right? Please forgive me, Your Majesty. If I didn't say so, you wouldn't have seen me at all." She gritted her teeth. "I'm not your brother's real wife, but we used to love each other. She's really just a liar." "Wait." Roland was stunned. "What did she say? My brother? Timothy?" She shook her head. "Gerald?" Chapter 620. After listening to Olivia's story, Roland could not help but feel emotional. The story was not complicated. As the commander of the border guards, Gerald Wimbledon had to go to Coldwind Ridge every year to help the church fight against the months of demons. During this time, he met Olivia in a tavern and they fell in love. Of course, with Olivia's status, it was almost impossible for her to marry into the palace. Gerald did not dare to make it public, so he quietly bought a house in the town and used it as their secret love nest. Roland did not know how true their love was, but he did remember that Gerald had never had any other lovers in King City. He had also rejected all the nobles' marriage proposals. There was even a rumor that the prince liked men. For an adult member of the royal family, it was really incredible. The contents of the secret letter that Olivia handed over were even more shocking. It seemed that Gerald insisted on marrying this commoner, which is his queen. It would have been fine if he had only said it verbally, but he had also left written evidence. If it was leaked out, Wimbledon 3 would definitely not give him a good look. However, good times did not last long. Ever since the news that the prince had been sentenced to death by Timothy spread to the northern region, Olivia's peaceful life was soon broken. Misfortunes came one after another. First, the guards left by Gerald left without saying goodbye. Then her house was burgled. Having lost her source of income, she had no choice but to return to the tavern where she used to work as a waitress. However, it was not over yet. The owner of the tavern seemed to be extremely dissatisfied with her sudden departure and began to grope her. Later, he even threatened and lured her into his room. In short, Olivia had been living a terrible life for the past 6 months. The owner's wife did not dare to complain too much to her husband, so she vented all her anger on Olivia, who was nominally a maid. Most of the time, the owner turned a blind eye to her, and sometimes he even joined in the bullying. Of course, Roland did not blame her for her lack of willpower. As an ordinary person who had no one to rely on, there were too many ways to make her surrender. After all, survival was the most important thing. In addition, the disappearance of the guards and the subsequent burglary were probably not accidental. The person who clearly knew the location of her money and decisively took advantage of her absence was most likely a traitor. "So what do you want me to help you with?" He didn't have any friendship with Gerald. If the fourth prince was counted, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was half an enemy. The reason why he decided to help Olivia was that Olivia had been patient all this time and had been waiting for a chance to save herself. Her temperament was indeed admirable. Moreover, for Roland, this kind of thing was just a piece of cake. As for the saying that dumplings are more delicious than delicious, he had never even thought about it. He swore, "I want to leave the tavern." "Your Majesty," she whispered, "can you help me find a new job? Are you sure you want to stay in the northern region? If the tavern owner still has feelings for you, he won't let you go so easily." Roland shrugged. He did not intend to personally intervene in this kind of civil dispute, which was too degrading. You can follow the fleet to the western region, where there will be no shortage of work, food, and housing. Olivia hesitated and lowered her voice. Your Majesty. I want to stay here. I think she's afraid of you. Nightingale whispered into his ears. For ordinary people, her appearance is at least half as good as Edith's. It's very normal for a tavern owner to covet her beauty. Nonsense, Roland mouthed and nodded. Well, I'll inform Duke Carwin and ask him to send someone to take you to the city of Evernight. If you're worried that you'll be late today, Sean can find you a hotel to spend the night. I'll never forget your kindness, Your Majesty. Olivia knelt again and said, But I have to go back today. It doesn't matter. Roland raised his eyebrows and looked at Sean. Send this lady off. When Olivia walked to the door, he suddenly asked, By the way, have you and Gerald had a child? Olivia stopped and turned around after a while. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't leave anything for him. When the guard took her out of the study, Nightingale showed up. She lied about her last sentence. Yes, I can see that. Roland twitched his mouth. She's not good at lying. That's why she was threatened by the tavern owner. Because of the child. The tavern owner should have known that it was Prince Gerald Wimbledon who took her away. He also knew that if Timothy found out about this, the child would definitely be killed. Olivia had to accept Timothy's conditions in order to protect her and Gerald's love. I guess that's what happened. Do you need me to inquire about it? Nightingale asked. Roland stared at her for a long time and gradually curled up the corner of his mouth. Are you worried that I'll hide this secret forever like Timothy? Even Duke Ryan's family is still under house arrest in Neverwinter. Don't worry, I won't do anything to these innocent people. He did not like the ancient kings who used the slogan of cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, let alone the illegitimate child of a commoner who posed no threat to the throne. If it's an order from you, I'll carry it out no matter what it is, Nightingale said slowly. I see. Roland grabbed her hand and put it on his shoulder. Then, give me a massage. Olivia returned to the temporary wooden house where the immigrants lived. Her footsteps startled the sleeping baby. Wah-wah. The child burst into tears. Damn it, tell him to shut up. Madam's roar came from inside the house. Or I'll stuff him into the toilet and throw him into the silent river. I'm sorry. I'll calm him down right away. Olivia did not care about the cold night in Deep Valley Town. She hurriedly took off her muddy dress and held the baby in her arms. The little guy stuck close to her and began to look for food. She was a little relieved. Her boss had not come back yet. She had made the right bet. Since they left Coldwind Ridge, his temper had become more and more irritable. He spent most of his time in the local taverns and casinos, and even the number of times he touched her had decreased. Because of this, Olivia dared to sneak out of the wooden house at night and go to the castle to beg Gerald's brother to help her. She did not dare to reveal the existence of the child, nor did she dare to follow him to the western region, which was the king's territory. If His Majesty wanted to harm the child, she would not be able to resist. Olivia gently stroked his head. In the dim moonlight, she could see the silver hair on his head, which was the symbol of the Wimbledon bloodline. Unfortunately, Gerald did not live to see this moment. When his letter was delivered to Coldwind Ridge, she did not know that she was pregnant with the prince's child. After eating and drinking, the baby hummed contentedly and soon fell asleep. Olivia lowered her head and kissed the baby's forehead. Chapter 621. As the ship slowly approached the old holy city along the river, the red bricks and green tiles of the cathedral gradually emerged from the shadows of the trees. Compared with the new cathedral on the Hermes Plateau, it looked ordinary. There was neither a magnificent chapel nor a towering Tower of Babel. In terms of scale, it might not be as magnificent as the churches in the capitals of the Four Kingdoms. However, in the hearts of most believers, this ancient and majestic building, together with the monastery, the arena and the arbitration court, constituted the abode of God. It symbolized the origin of the church and the beginning of everything. Isabella sneered at this statement. They would never know that the interior of the mountain behind the cathedral was the origin of the church. As for the old holy city, it was just a cover to deceive people. After the ship arrived at the dock, Isabella walked down the trestle lightly. The mechanic guard who came to greet her could not help but be surprised. "Your Excellency, where are the other pure witches? They'll arrive 1 or 2 days later." She shrugged. "His Holiness is so urgent that we have to give them some time to arrange their funeral affairs." But Lady Zero said. "She wants to see everyone," Isabella interrupted. "Yes, but she didn't say that she wants to see everyone at the same time." The recall order this time was somewhat difficult to understand. In this way, the church was equivalent to giving up control of the Kingdom of Dawn. Without the supply of potions, the king would die in an endless sleep. She did not understand why Zero suddenly changed the previously set plan, and there was no explanation in the edict. She is becoming more and more like the real Pope, Isabella thought with a little displeasure. Nevertheless, she still set off immediately after receiving the order and spent a week rushing back to Hermes. By the way, do you know what happened in the Holy City? When boarding the carriage, Isabella turned back to look at the guard behind her. The church's advance army fought with the Grey Castle army at the foot of Coldwind Ridge. The guard hesitated. "You'd better ask Lady Zero about the specific situation." "Did the advance army lose?" The guard did not answer but nodded slightly. He then mounted the horse and shouted to the coachman, "Set off." Isabella put down the curtain of the carriage, feeling confused. There was no doubt that there must be a large number of God's punishment army in this advance army. Only when the God's punishment army suffered losses would the higher-ups of the church react. However, Scourge was not immortal. When faced with some damage that exceeded their endurance, they would still suffer damage. Ever since they attacked the kingdom of Everwinter, the Holy City had lost nearly 100 extraordinary warriors. She thought that Zero had gotten used to it, but now it seemed like that was not the case. The question was, how severe was the loss in this battle that made Zero so determined to recall all the pure witches? The carriage drove through the busy streets of the old Holy City and came to a camp near the impassable cliff. The security here was as tight as the cathedral. Isabella got off the carriage and walked into a tunnel that was dug along the mountain wall. She passed through multiple iron gates and walked into the mountain. Under the cold light of the prism, the majestic outline of the pivotal secret temple appeared in front of her. Led by the guard, she went straight to the library on the top floor and pushed open the door of the circular hall. The current pope was standing by the window and looking into the distance, looking lost in thought. "It seems that you've met a tough nut to crack. You can't even take care of the Kingdom of Dawn." Isabella walked to Zero and whistled. "But no matter what, you should at least leave Lady and Blackveil there to stabilize the situation, right?" Zero did not answer. Instead, she pointed to the figures below the temple and said, "What do you think they look like?" Isabella frowned. "Does this have anything to do with my question?" "Insignificant, ignorant, busy all day, but don't know why they're busy, just like ants," she said to herself. "Gods probably think of us like that too. Throwing ourselves into bloody battles without knowing anything, and then dying without knowing anything. If we don't reach the peak, it's impossible to know what the whole world is like. Fortunately, now I'm one step closer to the divine will." "What on earth do you want to say?" "As long as I can devour the new king of Grey Castle, the chance of winning the battle of divine will increase by 50%. Zero raised the corner of her mouth and her eyes flashed with a light that she had never seen before. "I have a vague feeling that God sent him to me." After a moment of silence, Isabella said in a low voice, "I just want to know, in the battle at the foot of Coldwind Ridge, how many God's punishment army lost?" 150 died in the battle, and another 11 died on the way back to the Holy City. Zero looked at her with burning eyes. And the enemy was almost unharmed. Whether it was giant shields or spears, they couldn't threaten the defense line of Roland's army. Isabella suddenly felt a huge wave in her heart. In one battle, the number of God's punishment army's casualties is greater than the total number of the months of demons and the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart? How could a prince of Grey Castle have such a powerful force? A witch? A knight? No, they were not even worth mentioning. Even the fearful beast of hell, which was as strong as a mountain, would die under the siege of the gods' punishment warriors. She could not imagine how the other party had done it. A terrible snow powder weapon. Zero seemed to see through her thoughts. It can be used by mortals. It has a shooting range of more than 1,000 steps. Its power can easily break plate armor and iron shields. There's almost no gap between shots. Our people were completely used as targets. After listening to the whole battle, Isabella took a deep breath and looked uncertain. After a long time, she said, "So you lost." For the church, it was indeed a setback, and Solidal's judgment was too hasty. "No, I'm not referring to the battle," she interrupted. "I'm referring to what we talked about before. Only the winner is the favorite of God. Now it seems that the winner is not you. Do you think Roland Wimbledon is more likely to win God's smile than me?" Zero said calmly. "Don't forget our purpose." Isabella could not help raising her voice. "To defeat the demons and let the human race continue. As for whether the church will do it or not, I don't care. This battle has already proved the problem. Even if you gather all your strength to defeat and devour Roland, what good will it do? His army and witches will be slaughtered, and only a few people of the gods' punishment army will be left. Then what? In less than half a year, it will be the new months of demons." For a moment, she even thought that Zero would kill her, but until the end, Zero did not react. "Then what do you want me to do?" Chapter 622. Tell Roland Wimbledon our purpose, tell him the truth about the church. No, the union of witches, and tell him the whole story of the Battle of Divine Will over 400 years ago. 09 Small Talk Net. Since Zero became the Pope, the library had become a place where all the pure witches who belonged to the pivotal secret agency could go. The Battle of Divine Will was no longer a secret to them. What if he doesn't believe it? He'll believe it. As long as we take him to the illusion room in the Reflection Church, he'll know everything. He may also regard all of this as a trick of the witches, Zero said slowly. Let's take a step back and assume that Roland knows the truth about the union. Will he devote his entire life to fighting against demons? Isabella could not help but be stunned. She opened her mouth, but could not say a word of assurance. We all know what the nobles are like. What they're most interested in is territory, wealth, and pleasure. Maybe when the bloody moon comes and the demons appear, he'll organize the people to resist. But once the situation is in trouble, are you sure this dandy prince will persist to the end? Zero took her hand and led her to the round table. He's just a mortal, Isabella. He's fragile, powerless, short-lived, and his will quickly fade with age. A simple cold disease can kill him. Even if Roland accepts the mission of the Union and is determined to fight against the demons to the end, will his subjects and successors be willing to give up all the enjoyment and use all the resources in the territory for this endless cruel war? Only the Church can do this with the faith of God. At least, we should send a messenger to talk to him first. No matter how much we talk, we can't solve these problems. Zero shook her head. Defecting to the secular forces will collapse the faith of the Church and the Holy City. In order to stabilize the witch organization, Roland will certainly not let us and the God's punishment army go. If I devour him, the Holy City will also have to pay a heavy price. There's not much difference between the two results. In this case, why do you still pin your hope on a mortal? Isabella hesitated. She knew that Zero was right. Although the war would only hurt both sides, no one could guarantee that after the Church surrendered, he would not take revenge on the Church for the sake of his witches. In this way, losses would be unavoidable. Things seem to have returned to the past. The knowledge of those weapons doesn't belong exclusively to mortals, but mortals can't get a witch's body. Zero continued, through the battle of souls, I can obtain a person's inheritance and even his lifespan. No matter how long the battle of divine will lasts, I won't grow old or lose my way, and I won't have to worry about my foolish descendants ruining my achievements. She paused for a moment. In the past 200 years, I've seen too many geniuses lose all their energy. No matter how brave and intelligent they were when they were young, they would eventually turn into a pile of dust in the process of wasting away and stumbling. Just based on this, I'm far better than him. But, most importantly, I am God's favorite, Isabella. Zero emphasized in an unquestionable voice. No matter who my opponent is, I've never been defeated. The thousands of souls that have been devoured can testify to that. Isabella let out a long sigh. She was convinced. What are you going to do? If I don't get close enough, I can't eliminate the effect of the God's Stone of Retaliation. Zero chuckled. Don't forget the high-level sigils left by the Union. No one can use the divine will. Isabella frowned. And the infinity is a one-time thing. Are you sure you want to waste it on this? But it can play a role in turning the situation around, Zero said without hesitation. Whether it's against ordinary people or demons, as long as it can be used to end the battle, it won't be wasted. It will also drain all my magic power. She curled her lips. That's not a good feeling. Then you'll faint. Zero nodded. But it won't cause any harm to your body. As long as I can get in touch with Roland Wimbledon, the war will come to an end. If you lose, we'll all be finished. I've never imagined myself losing, Zero said disapprovingly. When you wake up, you'll already be lying in your bedroom in the cathedral. Speaking of this, she poured a cup of black tea for Isabella. I know you still have doubts about your decision, but don't forget, I raised you. From the moment you awakened, I chose you to be His Holiness O'Brien's pure witch, and I taught you knowledge and combat skills. You should be very clear about my determination and strength in fighting against the demons. No matter how you look at it, I'm the most suitable candidate to lead the human race in this battle of destiny. Well, I hope so. Isabella took a sip of tea. But according to the book, the effective range of the infinity can't really be extended indefinitely. In the case of your spiritual body, your magic power can only last for a very limited time. If you can't touch him, you won't have the chance to change people. So the first thing we need to do is to find him, Zero said with a smile. The shell is loaded. Angle 22, pitch 13, fire. As the command was given, the 152 mm long song cannon set up at the rear of the battle line spewed out orange flames, and the strong wind from the muzzle raised rolling sand and dust. Even though Roland, who was standing at the side, had covered his ears, he could still hear the dull roar brought by the sound waves. The soldiers at the scene stood on tiptoe and craned their necks to look at the mountains in the distance, but they were destined to not see the landing point of the bombardment. This is lightning. I've observed the location of the hit, the little girl reported through the sigil of listening. Well, it's probably in the middle of the slope. Very good, make a mark there, Roland replied. He was currently conducting the long-range calibration of the cannons. After all the residents of Coldwind Ridge had been evacuated, he began to instruct the artillery battalion to adjust the two ultimate weapons. In order to be worthy of its ultra-long range and high cost, he naturally would not let the artillerymen fire only after seeing the enemy. Thus, the first beyond visual range strike of this era was born. Of course, Roland did not expect the artillerymen to adjust the firing angle according to the deviation of the landing point, so he still used the old method of shooting first and then drawing the target. If the shell landed on the slope down the mountain, the position and data would be recorded. In actual combat, as long as the enemy moved within the range of the landing point, lightning could directly fire after reporting the number. Chapter 623. This is simply divine punishment. Iron Axe sighed. We can't even see the shadow of the enemy and can only passively take a beating. If it were an ordinary enemy, it would be impossible for them to finish this section of the mountain road under the artillery fire. 09 Smaltseichnet. The commander-in-chief of the First Army had seen the power of the howitzers, so he naturally knew how amazing the effect would be when it fell on a dense marching army. It was 5 kilometers from the first shell to the front of the position. The enemy would either run all the way and exhaust all their strength before the battle, or continue to march forward regardless of the consequences, dragging an incomplete army to attack the position. Of course, The most likely situation was that they would scatter and flee in disorder. It's a pity that the enemies we have to deal with are not ordinary. Roland smiled. And the number of shells is very limited. Otherwise, the 2 Longsong cannons alone would be enough to wipe out the enemy. The Longsong cannons were fired with a full load of ammunition, and the firing rate was as high as 8 rounds per minute. Its firepower delivery efficiency was absolutely insane in this era. Since the alchemist from King's City moved to Neverwinter with a large number of apprentices, the production of double-base propellants had been steadily increasing, and the number of shells had become the biggest limitation. The trigger fuse could only be produced by Anna by hand, and the extremely sophisticated mechanical structure limited the production of the howitzers. Your Majesty, all 20 rounds of calibration cannons have been fired, Battalion Commander Vanner reported after shooting several times. We got a total of 6 effective target data, which are generally distributed in the second half of the mountain road. Very good. Let's call it a day. Roland nodded. After all, the test shells also needed to be specially made. Although they used solid warheads, their shape and counterweight were no different from the grenades with a fuse. Only Anna could do such a delicate job. Every day, she would take time to make a certain number of test warheads for the artillery battalion to shoot. Do you need to go to other places? Iron Axe asked. Roland thought for a moment and then shook his head. I'll go back to the camp first. You continue to arrange the training of the soldiers. Yes, Your Majesty. He stood at attention and saluted. After returning to the camp, Roland leaned on the recliner and let out a long sigh. He realized that there was not much left for him to do, or rather, he had already done what he needed to do, and the rest was up to fate. 5 days ago, the church finally responded. According to Maggie's report, the gates of the Holy City were wide open, and countless people poured out of the city, marching towards Coldwind Ridge in a neat and long line. The armors of the warriors flickered with silver light. Looking down from the sky, it looked like a sparkling river flowing through the impassable mountain range. At the same time, the spies planted in the Old Holy City and the Hermes Highlands also sent back a secret letter, saying that the scale of the church's operation was unprecedented, and even the number of people active in the city had decreased a lot. It was obvious that the enemy had come out in full force. Upon receiving the news, Roland immediately rushed to the front line. His arrival also raised the morale of the First Army to the peak. A decisive battle that would determine the future of both sides was about to begin. More than 4,000 elite soldiers, a reserve night team provided by the Duke of the Northern Region, a preliminary investigation team composed of Lightning and Maggie, Sylvie's firepower guidance, and the combat witches scattered around the camp. Such preparations were perfect. Even the church's actions were carried out step by step according to the battle plan formulated by the general staff. In addition, all the residents of Coldwind Ridge had been evacuated. Even if the enemy wanted to use the berserk pill, they could only consume the believers in the Holy City or forcibly recruit residents from other kingdoms. This opening could be said to be perfect enough. However, Roland still had a trace of worry in his heart. That was the pure witches. It was unknown what kind of form they would appear in and what kind of ability they would use to interfere in the final battle. In order to avoid casualties caused by the enemy's sneak attack, the witches who stayed at the front line these days all slept in their clothes and all gathered in a large hall. Sylvie and Nightingale were divided into 2 groups and took turns to keep watch. As long as there was a magic reaction, the entire camp would be awakened by the echo of the alarm. As a result, until today, the church did not take any action other than sending troops to occupy Coldwind Ridge. Roland did not even see the shadow of the pure witches. He did not know whether the enemy was planning an earth-shattering conspiracy, or simply disdained to disturb him and intended to directly crush him on the battlefield. Whatever the case, the only thing he could do now was to continue to wait. After dinner, Roland lay in bed early, but he could not fall asleep until the bright moonlight shone on the bed through the window. He put on his clothes and walked out of the bedroom. Nightingale, who was waiting outside the room, immediately flashed over. What's wrong, can't sleep? A little, probably because there are too many wheat straws under the bed. Roland rubbed his neck and took out a wheat leaf from his collar. I always feel something prickling my back when I lie down. I think so too, Andrea, who was also in the first half of the night group, echoed. Not to mention a big bed, at least 2 more layers of silk mattresses. The Duke of the Northern Region is too stingy. We're fighting a war, not on an outing, ladies and gentlemen, Ashes said grumpily. It's good enough to have a house to shelter you from the wind and rain. Why are you asking for so much? Of course, for people with rough skin and flesh, there's really no difference. That's still better than being too weak. I think we need to have a rematch to see who's really too weak to stand up to the wind. You'll naturally understand after we deal with the church. Wait, can I bet? Shavy raised her hand. Nightingale pulled him aside and said, "Don't worry about them. This is a routine every night." Roland smiled and shook his head. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have put them together. Since Nightingale's detection range was far smaller than Sylvie's, the battle of the first half of the night group was handed over to the 3 card players. Together with Nightingale, this was already the witch's strongest attack combination. The second half of the night group was mainly for defense. The members were Agatha, Breeze, and Iffy. They were unparalleled in controlling and blocking the enemy. How are the others? Are they getting used to it? The Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association aren't as particular as you are. Nightingale blinked. They've experienced the days of fleeing and sleeping in the open. In this situation, they can close their eyes and fall asleep. Well, it seems that I'm the most impatient one. Roland sat on the steps and looked up at the stars. He was silent for a long time. When all this is over, what will happen to us? Nightingale sat down beside him. You're nervous, aren't you? I'm just a little emotional. He touched his nose guiltily. If we can't defeat the church, will Neverwinter continue with the current order? Will the kingdom be completely swallowed by the church, or will it return to the old path of the aristocratic separatist rule? And Anna and the other witches? Will they really be able to escape to Sleeping Island safely? Unconsciously, he had developed a deep affection for this land and the people who had built it with his blood and sweat. Chapter 624. Early the next morning, Roland received Maggie's report as soon as he arrived at the command post with breakfast in his hands. The church has made a move coup. Her excited voice came from the other end of the magic stone. A team has left Coldwind Ridge and is advancing to the defensive line. Coup. How many? 1, 2, 3, 5 in total. Roland, who was about to convene a frontline operational meeting, sat back down. What? And they're dressed in shiny gold and holding the flag of the Holy City. They're very ostentatious. Coup. Do I need to report the artillery markings? No need. Just keep watching Coldwind Ridge. He stuffed the bread into his mouth. What is the church trying to do? They're probably here to beg for mercy? Nightingale curled her lips. If that's the case, the Holy City shouldn't have sent troops to invade Coldwind Ridge. Roland frowned. A day and a half later, the team arrived at the front of the defensive line. The leading priest claimed that they were the emissary group sent by the church and wanted to see His Majesty. At the same time, he also wanted to give a letter personally written by His Holiness to the young king of Grey Castle. What do you think? Roland gathered the general staff and the witches and asked, Is this a trick of the pure witches? Before that, I want to ask your opinion. Edith was the first to speak. If the church wants to surrender, will you accept their peace talks? Roland rejected this possibility without hesitation. Unless they disband the God's Punishment Army and hand over all the senior leaders and those who have innocent blood for trial. But I don't think the church will accept such conditions. Indeed, Edith replied immediately. Then you shouldn't meet the emissary group. Let's not talk about whether they have a conspiracy. The negotiation process may also shake your determination. I agree. Agatha nodded. Although these 5 people don't have any magic reaction, the witches have all kinds of strange abilities. No one can guarantee what will happen in the next moment. Or we can just capture them and interrogate them. Once we know their intentions, we can kill them in secret. Iron Axe made a throat-cutting gesture. Your Majesty, Grey Castle is not Iron Sand City, Sir Schilt hurriedly advised. It's better not to do this kind of thing. It will damage your reputation if it gets out. I know, Roland thought for a moment and then looked at Iron Axe. Let them leave the letter and drive them away. Yes, Your Majesty. He couldn't help but be curious. What would the supreme ruler of Hermes say to him at this time? Was it advice or inducement? After multiple checks by Sylvie and Agatha, the letter written by the Pope of the Holy City was delivered to him. Opening the exquisite cover, the handwriting on the letter was unexpectedly graceful. The contents of the letter shocked Roland. It described the origin and purpose of the Church in a frank tone, and revealed the existence of the great enemy of mankind, the devil. If he hadn't known the secret of 400 years ago in advance, the content would have been enough to confuse him and make him feel incredulous. Was this the strategy that the enemy came up with? Using the dust-covered true history to confuse the enemy and treat it as the sincerity of the peace talks? As a result, when the first team returned, Coldwind Ridge sent another team of 5 people. Naturally, Roland didn't receive them but just kept the letter. This time, the content of the letter was more in-depth. In addition to a brief introduction of the predecessor of the Church, the Union, it even mentioned the Battle of Divine Will. The Pope believed that this alien war, which lasted for 400 years, was a test from God to the world. Roland sneered at this view, but he inexplicably felt a trace of uneasiness in his heart. In the following week, Coldwind Ridge sent several emissary groups to deliver the Pope's handwritten letter to the frontline camp. These letters didn't reveal much new information, and the content became shorter and shorter. As for the suggestion on the back of the letter that both sides should cooperate to fight against the devil, Roland just ignored it. The Holy City didn't send any new emissaries until the scorching summer arrived. This time, the enemy sent all their troops. This is lightning. The enemy has entered the 9th zone. I repeat, the enemy has entered the 9th zone. Hearing the voice from the sigil, Cat's Claw nervously flipped through the book in his hand. Number 9, hurry up. Rodney roared. The cannonball is ready. This is the fastest speed. Cat's Claw shouted. Here, angle 26, pitch 15. Narsen quickly turned the handle, 26, 15, complete. Ready to shoot. Hearing the command, Cat's Claw quickly covered his ears. Fire. Jop pulled the line of fire fiercely, and the 152mm long-song cannon instantly let out a shocking roar. The sound wave mixed with the airflow hit Cat's Claw's chest like a hammer, making his blood boil. Under the huge recoil, he felt the ground under his feet tremble. This is power, Cat's Claw thought. Compared to the short 12-pound iron tube, the long-song cannon was a more suitable weapon for men to operate. His only regret was that he couldn't see the scene when the cannonball landed. Mustering up his courage, Cat's Claw moved closer to the magic stone in Sylvie's hand. Miss Lightning, did we hit? We hit the target, the little girl replied. Compared to the gunners in the rear, Lightning and Maggie could observe the enemy's movements and attacks more directly. She floated at an absolutely safe height and looked down with the telescope in her hand. The howitzer just now landed on the west side of the 9th zone, which was almost 4 meters off the expected landing point. It was probably due to the change in the wind. But the actual effect was not bad at all. The Church's mighty army occupied the entire mountain path, and as long as the cannonball hit the troops, it would immediately bloom like a scarlet flower. That was the case with the attack just now. She couldn't see the process of the cannonball's flight and landing. The first thing she saw was a dark red light, followed by smoke and gravel rising high into the air. A fleeting ripple spread from the light, and wherever it passed, the dust would fly. The sound of the explosion could only be heard after a while, as if the two did not happen at the same time. When the smoke was blown away, the center of the landing point was only a scorched black, and the surrounding area was a mess of corpses. Broken limbs were everywhere, and the sticky organs and blood had dyed the shiny armor bright red. The Judgment Warriors a little further away were in a different state. They didn't seem to have any obvious wounds, but they still fell to the ground, vomiting blood. Some of them could still persist for a few meters before falling down, and their crooked steps made them look like they were drunk. Just one cannon attack had caused the church to lose close to 50 people. Lightning waved its fist in a carefree manner. "You guys deserve this." Then she shifted her gaze to the next artillery area. Chapter 625. Under the bombardment, the church's army became chaotic. The neat formation gradually separated, and Scourge, who was not affected by the outside world, began to run faster, leaving the Judgment Army behind. Just then, Lightning noticed a strange scene. A rider dressed as a priest quickly passed through the messy mountain road from the rear, his body flashing a striking yellow light. Wherever the yellow light went, the Judgment Army, which had been on the verge of collapse, stabilized and moved forward under the guidance of the rider. This time, they did not line up neatly but scattered, so that the subsequent grenades did not achieve as good a result as they had at the beginning. That was a pure witch. She was about to call 2 cannons to attack the area where the pure witch was about to pass through, when she heard Maggie scream, "Watch out, Koo!" Lightning reflexively raised her body up more than 10 meters. A swarm of locusts swept past her feet like a grayish-brown cloud. When they missed, the mosquitoes twisted together and formed a vague human figure. "Degenerate bastards, how dare you go against the church? You're asking for death." Maggie continued to guide the cannons. Lightning pulled down her goggles, pulled out her pistol and pointed at the swarm of insects. "Do you feel so proud to kill your own people? You're the ones who should die." The enemies entered Danny's field of vision. Unlike last time, they outnumbered him by several times this time. The gloss of the swaying armors filled the dusky wilderness. The gods' punishment warriors did not adopt the tactic of advancing slowly with shields. Instead, they started sprinting at full speed from the very beginning. Looking at the enemies charging at him from all over the mountains and wilderness, he actually felt the momentum of a flood. His palms couldn't help but break out in a thin layer of sweat, and the gun but became sticky to the touch. He had only seen such a scene on the city wall during the months of the demons. Thousands of demonic beasts, regardless of their own lives, would attack the city wall as if they were possessed. Anything that stood in their way would be mercilessly torn to shreds. Now, the First Army encountered enemies far more powerful than demonic beasts. But Danny was not afraid. The reason why the demonic beasts could not break through the low stone wall was because of the bloody militia corps on the wall. Now, the army of the church would also be blocked by the First Army's defensive line of flesh and blood. Moreover, the woman he wanted to protect was right behind the formation. When Danny stepped into the trench in the morning, he saw a familiar green figure. She turned her head and smiled at him. Although he knew it was just a polite greeting, the smile still took root in his heart like a blooming flower bud. He did not expect that she would also follow His Majesty to this battlefield. No matter what, he would not let the enemy break through the defense line. Unfortunately, after violating military discipline, Sir Iron Axe expelled him from the precision shooting team. Now, the weapon in his hand had been changed to a revolving rifle. Otherwise, he would have already taught these gods' punishment army a lesson. They've crossed the 300-meter line. Malt reported the distance of the target as if he was the protector. "Watch out for spears." "I can see it." Danny patted the short man's head. "Take care of yourself." Malt was one of the people who had been implicated by him. After he recovered, the commander-in-chief demoted Malt back to an ordinary gunman on the grounds that he did not dissuade the shooters from obeying the discipline. However, because he was an accomplice, the short man was not fined a month's salary and was spared from confinement. 09, small, net. It had to be said that this time, the enemy's attack was so fierce that the 4 machine gun forts could not completely suppress the charge of the gods' punishment army. With the dust on the ground and the smoke caused by the field artillery, several holes appeared in the interwoven firepower net. The gods' punishment army at the front had crossed the warning red line of the gunmen. 200-meter line, spear throw. "Get down! Get down!" Shouts rose one after another in the trench. Danny fired 5 bullets in one breath and then threw himself to the ground, not forgetting to replace the cartridge. After the spear throw, he got up and pulled the trigger at the nearest enemy. At this distance, the power of a revolving rifle was not much lower than that of a new weapon. Danny could almost see the calm expression on Scourge's face, as if the surrounding artillery and gunfire had nothing to do with him. He did not stop trembling until the bullets pierced through his chest and neck and blew his head off. He fell down with blue blood spurting from his mouth. More and more enemies rushed through the line of fire. Danny quickly emptied the 3 cartridges. According to the plan, he lifted his gun and retreated to the second trench. When he followed his teammates into the entrance of the longitudinal trench, a black shadow fell from the sky. He saw a Scourge jump high over the barbed wire in front of the trench and slash at him with a big sword. "Run!" He grabbed Malt behind him and pulled him into his arms. A loud bang. Danny suddenly felt the weight in his hand lighten, and he rolled back a few times. When he opened his eyes, he saw that only half of Malt's body was left in his arms. Malt looked at him and opened his mouth, but a few mouthfuls of blood gushed out. He could no longer say anything. Danny only felt a buzz in his head. He shouted and raised his rifle, but Scourge had already pounced on him. He cut off both of Danny's arms with a horizontal sweep and then slashed at Danny's face. At that moment, Danny could even see the rough, blood-stained edge of the sword. Just when he thought he was going to die, another cold light flashed from the corner of his eyes and collided with the big sword from the bottom up, bursting out a series of sparks. This blow was so powerful that the god's punishment warrior's weapon was sent flying. A woman appeared above the trench. Her long black hair was tied into a waist-length ponytail, and her eyes were shining with golden light. She looked like an insurmountable mountain. Scourge, who had lost his big sword, did not flinch at all. Instead, he clenched his fist and punched at her. The latter neatly knocked him to the ground, then walked up to the defenseless enemy and crushed his head with one foot. The blue-white mixture splashed on Danny's face. "Go!" She glanced sideways at the soldiers who were still in shock and spat out a word coldly. Then she fought with the other 2 Scourge who rushed up. "This guy is hurt. Carry him away. Take Malt with you," Danny said hoarsely. He wanted to hold the little man in his arms, but his bare arms could not hold anything. "He's dead," someone shouted. "Do you want to kill all of us?" The teammate who followed him put his broken hand in his arms and carried him back to the trench. The lifeless Malt gradually disappeared from Danny's sight. Lightning increased her speed to the limit and once again went behind the swarm of insects and pulled the trigger. She had figured out the details of her opponent. The swarm of insects seemed to be incorporeal, but killing each insect would make the Pure Witch lose part of her magic power. This was especially true when Maggie turned into the natural enemy of locusts, the mountain swallow. She constantly swept past the swarm of insects and forced them into a ball. Then she pulled out her pistol and fired a round of vicious curses and roars. She could not hold on for much longer. Just as lightning pulled away and was about to reload, the locusts suddenly changed direction and rushed to the ground. "Maggie!" the little girl shouted. "Oh!" The goshawk folded its wings and swooped down. Then a bloody mouth suddenly appeared under the swarm of insects. What is this? It's impossible." The sound of the locusts flapping their wings turned into a cry of surprise. They wanted to turn around and escape, but it was too late. Maggie swallowed the insects effortlessly. She chewed twice and said, "Oh, not delicious." Lightning shrugged and put the pistol at her waist. "Because you didn't roast them with fire or seasoning." It was not until this moment that she noticed that there were several bloody wounds on her body. In the first test, she was scratched several times by the swarm of insects. The teeth of these locusts were as hard as files. If she was an ordinary person, it would be difficult for her to avoid such a flexible attack. Looking at the slope full of craters and corpses, Lightning took a deep breath and said, "We don't need artillery to guide us here. Let's go and support His Majesty." Chapter 626. This was a pure massacre. Sitting on the top floor of the tower, Nail thought to himself with his hand on the grip of the machine gun. As long as the trigger was pressed, This steel weapon would continuously spit out tongues of flame, shooting bullets at the enemy like a stream of water. The place where the muzzle was pointed would soon be covered by the net of death, and all the lives caught in it would be fragmented like a porcelain bowl falling from a table. The feeling of dominating the battlefield from a high position made his blood boil. So did his comrades in the same squad. The 66th. Look, the poor guy is falling apart. How did you count? It should be the 68th. Look over there, a guy is still rolling on the ground. Let him die. His intestines are flowing out. Don't waste bullets. Let him struggle slowly. With a click, the cloth belt slipped down and a box of bullets was emptied. Guys who cover the third trench, I want to change the cartridge. Nail shouted to another machine gun squad in the tower. Don't worry, leave it to us. His teammates quickly dragged a box of new bullets. During the process of changing the cartridge belt, Nail did not stay idle. He put on a thick single glove, clamped the smoking barrel with a special clamp, held the barrel with one hand, and disassembled it in a few seconds. Then he gently put it on an open space beside him. According to the training requirements, the gun barrel must be changed after firing a box of bullets to prevent the barrel from overheating and deforming unless there was no other choice. It was said that this kind of grayish-black steel pipe, which could closely fit the screw threads in the barrel, was made by Miss Anna, the witch. Each of them cost about 50 golden dragon, so the members of the squad treated the machine gun like their own children. After the cooled-down gun barrel was installed, the tower resounded again with a harsh sound. Look, at the east end of the first trench, there's a witch. Someone beside him suddenly shouted. That's not a witch, idiot. They're pure witches, the enemies of Miss Nana. Nail also saw the target indicated by his teammates. The woman in the red robe had one of her legs broken by a flying bullet. She was crawling forward slowly on the ground, and there was a shallow trail of blood on the back of her robe. He aimed the muzzle at the pure witch, but he suddenly felt sorry for her and didn't press the trigger. Judging from her figure, she was probably not of age yet. Shoot, what are you waiting for? Just as she was hesitating, a series of sand pillars swept past her body. The struggle stopped, and blood spread from her abdomen like a small red flower. Damn it, someone stole another spoil of war. Stop it, the other man interrupted and patted Nail on the shoulder. If you're tired, let me do it. He took a deep breath. No, I'm fine. His boiling blood cooled down a little. This is a war with the church. Regardless of age, the enemy is the enemy. I'm still too weak. Nail secretly gritted his teeth and put the distracting thoughts behind him. Wait, what happened in the middle of the third trench? The observer of another team suddenly exclaimed. Did the ground collapse? Oh my God, what's that? Damn it, it's the pure witches? More than one of them. Kill them. Nail quickly turned the muzzle and saw a square pit suddenly appear in the middle of the third trench. The walls were so flat that they seemed to be cut by a knife. A woman with a black veil jumped out of the pit and stood upright with her hands behind her back. Before he could open fire, he heard a rush of wind in his ears. As soon as he turned his head, the butt of the gun hit him hard in the face. Nail suddenly felt everything went black and he fell to the ground. Before he lost consciousness, the last thing he saw was his teammates raising their guns at him. Standing on the command platform, Roland used the telescope to observe the line of defense, which was gradually becoming clear. Some of the enemies had crossed the first 3 trenches and were breaking through to the 4th trench. However, the soldiers retreating from the front line made the firepower of the rear defensive line more and more concentrated. Under the continuous strafing of the 2 machine gun towers occupying the high ground, the offensive momentum of the God's Punishment Army was obviously declining. According to this trend, it was impossible for them to reach the remaining 5 trenches and artillery positions. Because the firepower on the ground was too fierce, many of the church's soldiers had moved into the trenches. The First Army would inevitably establish blocking points at the exit of each section of the longitudinal trench according to the plan. In this way, the enemy's advancing speed would be greatly reduced, and the speed advantage of the God's Punishment Army would no longer be obvious. At this moment, the Judgment Army gradually entered the battlefield. This army had suffered heavy losses under the attack of the Longsong cannons, but it had not yet collapsed, which was really beyond Roland's expectation. As for being able to enter the battle immediately, it was nothing more than the pill of madness. However, compared with the God's Punishment Army, the threat of the Judgment Army was obviously much lower. The pill of madness could not make people immune to fear. When the Judgment Army was baptized by the field artillery and machine guns, even the will of God would not be able to save them. It had to be said that the biggest contributors to this battle were the 8 Mark I-type heavy machine guns placed in the bunkers and towers on the flanks of the position. In order to ensure that they could fire continuously, not only did they have enough bullets, but also nearly 10 spare gun barrels were equipped in each squad. The only problem was that, according to this way of shooting, the bullets that they had painstakingly stored would probably be very few. Of course, if they could completely destroy the main force of the church here, this price would be extremely worthwhile. During this period, Sylvie also observed several magic reactions, but those pure witches did not play a big role in the hail of bullets. They followed the God's Punishment Army forward, but soon disappeared in the smoke and artillery fire. The victory had been decided. The Church of Hermes was about to become the dust of history. Just as Roland was thinking about this, a sudden change occurred. In front, there are a large number of pure witches. Sylvie, who was also standing on the high platform, issued a warning. For, they know 5. The surface of the third trench suddenly bulged, as if it was lifted by something, and then quickly sank down, pulling the surrounding barbed wire and wooden stakes into the ground. A woman wearing a black veil appeared at the site of the collapse. She did not make any movements, but just looked straight ahead. A strange scene appeared. Many soldiers in the trench turned the muzzle, pointed it at their own chin, and then pulled the trigger. Clouds of blood sprayed out from the trench like a red fountain. The 4 machine gun forts also stopped firing at the same time. The soldiers who were not affected, as if awakened from a dream, raised their guns and shot at her. In the blink of an eye, the pure witch was shot several times and fell backward into the pit. Chapter 627. Lady Zero, Margie can't hold on much longer. Vanilla turned his head and said worriedly, "Let's wait a little longer." Zero looked up with a gloomy face. Although they were underground, the dome was bright. She saw the God's Punishment Army moving forward along the crisscross tunnels, nibbling away at the enemy's position little by little. However, it was obvious that their progress was getting slower and slower. Every pass was guarded by a large number of soldiers, and the straight tunnels were almost unavoidable. While throwing spears, they would inevitably be shot down by snow powder weapons, so they could only rely on the number of soldiers to fill the gaps between the ditches. Many of the pits were already filled with blue blood. As for the ground, it was even more difficult to move forward. Although Scourge could jump over the unbreakable barbed wire, he would still be exposed to the enemy's firepower, especially in the 4 sentry towers behind the line of defense, where the deadly fire almost never stopped. Perhaps the third ditch was the limit of the God's Punishment Army. Damn it, I didn't expect things to be in such a deadlock. She had made ample preparations for this day to come. For example, she had found the location of Roland Wimbledon. The peace talk of the emissary delegation was just a pretense. It would be better if she could see him, but it didn't matter if she couldn't. The letter written in the name of the Pope revealed some secrets about the Church and the battle of divine will. This sounded like a fairy tale, and others might laugh it off, but the name of the Pope was a guarantee. Moreover, the contents of her letter were all true. Even if Roland had witches who could distinguish the authenticity of the letter from the handwriting, he would not be able to find any clues. The surface of the letter was smeared with a special powder. It was an alchemy product developed by the pivotal secret agency, and it could emit a smell that ordinary people could not detect. Every time someone touched the paper, the smell would accumulate and soak into the skin, which could not be removed even with water. Zero firmly believed that they would be sent to Roland one after another. No ruler would not be interested in such a shocking secret, and it was impossible for them to casually show the letter to other people. In this way, the smell on his body must be the strongest among all of them. Although he looked no different from an ordinary person, to Vanilla's nose, this smell was the most eye-catching beacon. When Vanilla used her ability, she could smell a lot of strange smells. According to her, a month of blood still emitted a faint stench, and when animals were in heat, she could also detect the strange smell on their skin. At this moment, Roland was only 1,000 steps away from them. Secondly, considering that there might be witches in the enemy camp who could observe magic power, Zero did not hesitate to use the God's Punishment Army and the Judgment Army to attract all the attention of the Grey Castle defense line. She even sacrificed some of the less important pure witches. The real decisive battle was hidden deep underground and relied on Maggie's magic arc to travel between the rock strata. The final person to break the stalemate was the Black Veil Saint. As one of the 3 pure witches of the highest rank in the Holy City, valued by His Holiness O'Brien, her ability was like the arrival of the Grim Reaper to unprotected mortals. Before adulthood, anyone who looked into her eyes would sincerely feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. After adulthood, this ability was further strengthened. As long as people looked into her eyes, they would be deprived of their minds by fear, and they would kill themselves or hurt people around them in crazy and frightening delusions. At the same time, the branch ability awakened by the Black Veil Saint was also extremely powerful. She could not only create fear by looking into the eyes of others, but also create illusions that were indistinguishable from reality. Although she could only affect one person at a time, she could play a miraculous role at the critical moment. This was because of the Black Veil Saint's ability that Archbishop Tayfun never doubted the Pope's order. Under the gaze of the Eyes of Death, it was not surprising that she could defeat Roland's army in one fell swoop. Everything seemed to be going well until the start of the war, when Zero found that she had still miscalculated. She did not expect that she still underestimated the power of the snow powder weapon. Roland's weapon unexpectedly launched an attack from 10 miles away. The mountain road was shrouded in thick smoke and flames. The church's army was hit head-on even before it came into contact with the defense line. After turning to attack the position, she found that the situation of the God's Punishment Army was not much better. These seemingly shallow trenches were actually more difficult to deal with than the towering city wall. The warriors seized the horizontal trenches one by one against the flying projectiles. However, they did not expect that the enemy did not care about the loss of the front line at all. They orderly retreated, giving way to the God's Punishment Army who had paid a heavy price to approach, and then continued to rely on the follow-up channels to block the warriors' actions. During this time, Zero even saw a supernatural being. Maggie's magic arc could not be maintained forever, and the momentum of the God's Punishment Army was getting weaker and weaker. However, the current situation was still far from her original expectation. According to Isabella's perception, less than half of the enemies were wearing God's stones. If she wanted as many people as possible to see her, she had to gather them together. At present, the God's Punishment Army had only advanced to the 3rd trench, and the gathering situation in the remaining trenches was still too sparse. Once the Black Veil Saint was exposed to the public, the time to use her ability would be extremely limited. How many people could pay attention to her within 1 or 2 breaths? Perhaps many people would be knocked down by the snow powder weapons before they came to their senses. Your Holiness, the Ark, is about to collapse. Maggie's face was covered with sweat and her voice was trembling slightly. Obviously, the overuse of magic power was a great burden on her. At the same time, cracks appeared on the 4 walls of the space, and the dome began to dim. Zero knew that she had to make a choice. In other words, she had no other choice at all. Float up and act according to the plan. Maggie took a deep breath and began to control the ark to quickly approach the ground. At the moment when the ark rushed out of the ground, the magic power instantly dissipated, and the pungent smell of smoke, dull continuous roars, and the smell of blood suddenly filled the surroundings. The Black Veil Saint looked back at Zero deeply, and then jumped out of the square pit formed by the ark. It was foreseeable that this would be the last time she would serve the church. The battlefield suddenly became quiet, as if an invisible giant hand had pinched everyone's throat. Isabella! Zero shouted, "Activate Infinity!" After a few crisp sounds, a few flowers of blood bloomed behind the black veil saint, and then she fell back to the bottom of the pit like a rootless leaf. Isabella clenched her teeth and held the sigil in her hand. The black translucent magic stone suddenly emitted a dark luster, as if it absorbed the surrounding sunlight. An invisible ripple spread from here. Under the effect of infinity, it quickly spread throughout the entire battlefield. The amplitude of the ripple was exactly the same as that of the god's stone worn by Roland, but in the opposite direction. Under the influence of this ripple, the black hole formed by the high-quality god's stone disappeared without a trace. Almost at the same time, Zero turned into a ray of light and rushed to the king of Greycastle, who was thousands of steps away. The moment she flew out of the pit, she looked down at the entire battlefield from a high vantage point. Hundreds of mortal soldiers collapsed in the pit. Shock and fear on the faces of the enemies. The Transcendent was closing in quickly. The Judgment Army who took this opportunity to charge. Everything seemed to stop until the deadly fire on the sentry tower appeared again, and the flow of time on the battlefield resumed. The sounds of fighting, roaring, crying, and the explosion of snow powder intertwined, forming a shocking ode. As she got closer and closer to the high platform, she saw the gray-haired prince and God smile. Nightingale clearly witnessed this strange change. In the world of black and white fog, the magic radiance of the shadow was extremely eye-catching. It was like a hazy cyclone, rushing to the rear of the camp at an extremely fast speed. She knew that this was the last and most fatal blow of the Pure Witch. "Protect His Majesty!" Shavi stretched out her hand and propped up a wide magic barrier, which was enough to cover the entire high platform. She summoned her magic longbow and shot an arrow of light that was as dazzling as the sun at the dim light. Nightingale grabbed Roland, who had lost the protection of the god's stone, and ran backward. No matter what the dim light was, it was obviously coming for His Majesty. However, it was moving too fast. In the blink of an eye, the dim light passed through the arrow of light and the magic barrier, catching up with the two unhindered. Even the fog could not block its tracking. Nightingale pushed Roland away without hesitation and rushed toward the dim light. Unfortunately, her last effort was of no use. Everything happened in a flash. The dim light penetrated her body and directly entered Roland's. "No!" She let out a heart-wrenching cry. Chapter 628. Is this a dream? Roland blinked, walked to the fence step by step, and looked down at the school under the setting sun. There was no one on the empty field, and the lonely goal post cast a long shadow in the orange afterglow. In the distance were the familiar library and dormitory buildings, and rows of transparent windows were dyed with a touch of gold by the setting sun that had sunk into the sky. He had studied and lived here for nearly 7 years, so he was very familiar with the grass and trees. The place where he was now was undoubtedly the rooftop of the teaching building. It was also the place where he went most often in his spare time. Here, Roland had too many memories. For example, the iron gate behind him that kept opening and closing with the warm wind. This iron gate could be called a unique scenery on the rooftop of the teaching building. It looked so old that it looked like a cultural relic excavated by archaeologists. When he came to this school, the iron gate was already broken. Whenever he pushed it, it would scream intermittently, as if it was out of breath. Therefore, the period after the iron gate opened and closed was always particularly quiet. Roland always thought that it would collapse soon, but the iron gate still stayed quietly on the rooftop until the day of his graduation. But if it was a dream, why did he still look like this? He looked down at his slender hands, and then touched the gray hair on his shoulders. Obviously, this height and body shape did not match with him when he was obsessed with learning. Think about it. What exactly happened before? Roland frowned and thought for a moment, and then remembered that the last scene was when Nightingale pushed him away, and then a dim light flashed, followed by her panicked and desperate face. "Who the hell are you?" A sweet and ethereal female voice suddenly sounded beside him. Roland was startled and turned his head abruptly, only to see a white-haired woman walking out from behind the stairs. She had a pair of ruby-like eyes, and her red and white robe was straight to the ground with delicate golden patterns at the corners. Obviously, she did not belong to this era, and the golden crown on her head had already revealed her identity. Are you the Church's pure witch? I'm also the 15th Pope of the Holy City of Hermes. She paused. My name is Zero, but you're definitely not Roland Wimbledon. As expected, Roland could not help but frown. So you created this place? Everything made sense now. The ghostly light should be this guy's ability, which was why Nightingale had brought him away. The scene in front of him should be the effect of an illusion or virtual space. The moment he opened his eyes, he thought he had traveled back in time. Although he knew that the predecessor of the church was probably the Union, he did not expect that the Pope was also a pure witch. Although they were both witches, it was unbelievable that these people could turn their own kind into inhumane monsters. No, you created it. Zero walked towards him step by step, her tone full of interest. It's the place that has left the deepest impression in your memory. Most of the time, it appears in your daily life. But I'm curious, where exactly is this place? The fourth Prince of Grey Castle would never live in a place like this. Why should I tell you? Roland cautiously moved towards the side of the railing to keep a distance from her. What should I do to get rid of the illusion? A thought flashed through his mind. Jump from the top of the building? Based on his experience with nightmares, as long as he found a high place to jump, he would immediately wake up from the dream. It doesn't matter if you don't tell me. She smiled, her voice was very pleasant. As long as I put in some effort, I'll find out sooner or later, including who you are, where you come from, and how you became the fourth Prince of Grey Castle. I'll find out sooner or later? Are you talking about reading my memory? Roland sneered. Don't overeat yourself. Do you know? Zero suddenly stopped. I'll explain the function, rules, and consequences of my ability to everyone who is affected by my ability, but you're an exception. What? As soon as Roland asked, he found that the pure witch had already jumped in front of him. The sudden pain made him suddenly unable to hear any sound. Trembling, he lowered his head and saw a long knife inserted into his chest. Roland wanted to open his mouth and shout, but no sound came out. His lungs had been completely destroyed, and even when he opened and closed his chest, he could not squeeze any air into his throat. The severe pain was like an electric current running through his whole body. He would rather die immediately than endure it for another second. Because I don't like anything that I can't understand. The other end of the knife hilt was Zero's nonchalant face. The blood that gushed out had already soaked half of her body. Due to the lack of oxygen and the brain's self-protective fainting, Roland's consciousness quickly blurred. The next second, he was still standing at the side of the railing, his body intact. The pure witch was also standing a few meters away from him, as if she had never left the place. What's going on? Roland gasped for breath. Illusion? He covered his violently rising and falling chest, where the knife was pierced was still faintly aching. He lowered his head and saw a large pool of blood sprayed out under his feet. Damn it, what just happened was real. He stared at the long knife in Zero's hand and was extremely surprised. Her hand was clearly empty before. Creating something out of thin air? At this moment, Zero rushed over again. Her speed was so fast that it was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. Roland turned around to escape, but just as he took a step, he felt a numbness in his abdomen. Then he experienced death once again. Zero slashed the long knife diagonally and cut him horizontally into two halves. This time the pain lasted longer than the last time. Roland fell in his own blood and scattered internal organs. The continuous pain made him let out a heart-wrenching scream, which was so shrill that even he himself was startled. During the second resurrection, Roland had already realized something. This was not a nightmare that would end after jumping off a building or the pain, but more like a never-ending gladiator arena. Damn it, then what is the condition to escape? Defeat the initiator of the ability, the white-haired witch in front of me? Since she can create weapons out of thin air, then what about me? Roland clenched his teeth and concentrated. If he had a shield, he would not be so defenseless. A blue light flashed. Zero's surprise attack was blocked, and a transparent explosion-proof shield appeared in his hand. The long knife left a deep cut on it, and Roland was also bounced off by the huge impact. Damn, it's really like this? He cursed in his heart. The moment he rolled, he dropped the shield and replaced it with an automatic rifle. Just as Roland raised his gun and was about to shoot, Zero had already disappeared. What's going on? A voice came from his ear. Chapter 629. I have to admit that I'm surprised by your ability to comprehend. Zero walked up to him and squatted down. You're the first person who can comprehend this and counterattack without any explanation. The Pure Witch picked up the rifle on the ground and held it in her hands to carefully examine it for a moment. Rare materials, exquisite processing techniques. Is this also a snow powder weapon? What you've created is indeed terrifying, but it doesn't pose much of a threat to me. I've been carefully observing the entire battle. Whether it's the slender pipes in the tunnels or the thick iron pipes behind the camp, they mostly depend on the operator, but you can't even see my movements clearly. She shook her head and said, over the years, I've devoured countless warriors, including an extraordinaire. You won't be able to defeat me. Suddenly, a green plastic box appeared between them. A huge explosion instantly resounded through the roof, shattering the classroom glass and even blowing a hole in the entire floor. The sweeping airflow overturned the dilapidated iron door of the stairwell to the ground. It's not that I have a strong ability to comprehend, but your stage setting is too clumsy. Roland reappeared in a corner of the rooftop. He gasped for breath, the sharp pain just now still fresh in his memory. Only now did he know how those guys who had their limbs cut off felt before they died. He could not bear it anymore, so he created a bag of explosives and blew himself and Zero into pieces at the same time. Clumsy. The newborn Zero raised her eyebrows and said, "This is your memory. But it was created by your ability. You should know that 6 o'clock in the evening is the busiest time on campus. How can there be no one on the playground? It looks exquisite, but it's just a stage board full of loopholes." He stalled for time while quickly thinking of countermeasures. Is this how you devour your opponents? Force them to despair, admit defeat, and then obediently offer their knowledge and skills to you? The Pure Witch's skills were somewhat similar to those of an extraordinary. At least, he had only seen this kind of explosive power and speed from ashes. It was difficult to hit her with an ordinary gun. Only a powerful explosive could hurt her, although he himself could not escape from the range of the explosion. But was it really that simple? After 3 resurrections, Roland felt sweat oozing from his back and his heartbeat was much faster than before. His physical strength was obviously declining as if he had just finished a lap around the playground. Is there a limit to the number of gladiator fights? If that's the case, the method of creating a bunch of explosives to blow the whole building up into the sky wouldn't work. At present, the score was already 1-3. He had to find a way to reverse the disadvantage as soon as possible. There was no doubt that he needed a weapon that could both attack and defend. Zero tilted her head and said, "The process of death is a kind of torment for anyone. Even if you give up, it's a wise move." "Save that for yourself," Roland roared. Iron Man. In an instant, a red metal armor appeared in front of him. He walked behind the armor and muttered in his heart, "Start the sequence." However, other than the narrow video that appeared in front of the helmet, the armor did not seal itself, and no artificial intelligence responded to his call. Before Roland could get up, Zero had already cut his neck with the blade. The whole world suddenly turned upside down. He saw his body kneeling down powerlessly, and then he was shrouded in darkness. The whole world suddenly turned upside down. He saw his body kneeling down powerlessly, and then he was shrouded in darkness. If you want to create a plate armor, you have to at least put some joints on it. The Pure Witch knocked on the hollow battle suit. Although I don't think this kind of hollow and thin iron sheet is very useful. Roland's heart suddenly sank after his 4th resurrection. Although the death just now was not painful, he had realized a harsh reality. Even if he created something he did not understand the principle of, it would only be an empty shell. For example, the display screen on the visor was just a simple camera. Damn it, I can only use a stupid method. While the other party was still figuring out the metal suit, several steel plates up to 10 centimeters thick appeared out of thin air and fell beside him, forming a pillbox that could only accommodate one person. A protected remote control weapon station rose from the top of the pillbox. It was equipped with a 40mm howitzer machine gun. Roland dived into it, locked the entrance, and controlled the weapon station to fire at the Pure Witch. This time, it was finally effective. Even if Zero once again approached the fortress, she would not be able to avoid the AoE rifle grenades. Roland directly bombarded the surroundings of the bunker with a series of grenades. The flying shrapnel pierced her body with thousands of holes, and at the same time, when the shrapnel hit the thick steel plate, it made a clanking sound. Unfortunately, Roland did not immediately find her resurrection position. After rebirth, the Pure Witch quickly retreated to the dead corner of the stairwell, avoiding the following explosive grenades. Just as he was about to create another offensive weapon, a brilliant light appeared in the darkening sky. Golden light flowed above the clouds, and the sunset was replaced by dazzling tassels. The setting sun also seemed to be overshadowed. He seemed to have seen this scene somewhere before. In an instant, countless golden thunder fell on the roof of the teaching building and instantly engulfed Roland's figure. After the fifth death, he looked like a person who had been fished out of the water. His whole body was soaked in cold sweat, and the muscles in his calves and arms could not stop twitching. The pillbox had been completely melted by the sigil of God's will, but there was not much damage except for the scorched ground. It could only be said that magic power still worked in this battle, and it was unreasonable. Give up. Unexpectedly, Zero did not press forward. Your spirit is almost at its limit. There's not much meaning in the following battles. You won't get anything except endless pain. Roland clenched his teeth and forced himself not to fall. She could obviously follow up with another attack, so why did she repeatedly ask him to give up? Was it different for her to be killed after using up the number of times and to surrender? You should now understand that both creation and death will consume your spirit, and the exhaustion of your spirit means failure. Everyone's spirit strength is different, and it's already beyond my expectation that you can persist until now. She spread out her hands and said, "By the way, I have experienced more than 200 years, and if the time in the soul battlefield is included, I'm afraid it will be twice as long. In other words, my spirit is enough to support me to withstand hundreds of deaths, and your efforts will only make you more desperate." Hundreds of deaths. Is she bluffing or telling the truth? But looking at her skillful and easy manner, Roland faintly felt that she was not lying. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.